this is scary to say because I don't think I've actually said these words out loud. Um, See, this is a good question. I don't know what it is. I never thought about it that way. That is such an interesting question. Thank you. Really. Thank you for the time to reflect and bond.
This is the Inner Landscape Travel Agency. Let's saunter across the psyche through creativity, self-discovery, and the sacred. If you're curious, playful, and seeking, welcome. Hiya, Anya. Thank you for joining for a conversational portrait. Right around the first pandemic Thanksgiving, I was introduced to your curiosity and your penchant for tinkering. And since then, I've admired your career path, resourcefulness, and your need to ask questions. And we recently reconnected after I learned that you traded outward nomadic travels for inward ones. And today we get to explore both. Welcome, Anya Ruvinskaya.
Thank you, Mick. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a very humbling intro. You're very kind. Hopefully, I live up to it. Oh, just even a tiny bit.
I have no doubt that you will, and beyond.
We'll see. We'll see.
In order for us to go inward, we need both literal and figurative silence. In your life, where do you find the silence?
Well, if we are talking about the recent past and the newfound internal silence, it's definitely been meditation for me. I think in the past, that version of silence was numbing, which is quite different.
Numbing how?
Oh, all the ways, like, I mean, the first word that came to mind is books, and that's not representative. It sounds way too like self-adjusted or productive. TV, like whatever other coping mechanisms. Sometimes, honestly, like this is now going just straight into it. I would have days where I don't get out of bed. So it was silent. I wasn't doing anything, but it was numbing. It wasn't nurturing. It wasn't working through anything. It was, I don't know, some kind of weird association running away. I don't know what it was, but that's not the kind of silence I would think of when you ask me that now.
I'm curious to explore the learnings from there, from both silences. Later, I'm curious with today's version of silence, one that you've found yourself embracing. What thoughts tend to muddy it up?
I'm not sure. Honestly, because now that you said that and I answered, I now have come to have a strong association of silence with meditation. It's the closest connection in my mind at this point. Um, and I think now I also don't feel like there's much that muddies it up because whatever's there is supposed to be there. I need to let it be there. The whole point is just to let whatever pass. So I don't think of it as mud. It's imperfect because it's supposed to be imperfect, and perfect isn't possible. So silence is nuanced. Sometimes my earrings, sometimes it's my thoughts, sometimes someone coughs. I don't know. Sometimes there's a fire alarm.
What do you think about when you're not thinking about anything?
If we're talking about meditation now, there's like levels, different levels that you enter. So, when I first sit down, when I close my eyes, when I try to get silent, it's a lot of thoughts kind of at the surface. I'm still tuned into them. I'm still associating with them. And then when I get into a deeper level of meditation, it's rare that I get to a place where like there are no thoughts and I am not recognizing them and I'm not associating with them. That's not like a common daily meditation. I'm only a human. That's the very beginning of my journey. So when I get there, I'm just in that rare case. When I get there, I am focused on my body or something else, or I'm just like feeling the energy, whatever it might be. But when it's my usual day to day, it's random. I mean, it could be like some tune of a song. It could be what I'm going to eat for lunch. It could be something I'm worried about, something that happened at work, some conversation that I had or didn't have or want to have. I mean, it's everything. It's like all the random things that fire in there.
Who are the people in your life with whom you can share silence?
I uh, I want to say that at this point I'm capable of doing that almost with anyone. So it more so depends on them and whether they are comfortable and can carry the silence. Like I've sort of, you can say, meditated with friends that don't normally meditate. Like they would come to visit me and be like, "It's time for me to sit. Do you want to sit with me?" And sometimes, rarely, they say yes. And the few have made it through like an hour of quietness with me. But sometimes people don't last that long. And then even just when you're hanging out, like I've come to appreciate the silence in between the conversation now. I don't necessarily always feel as much of a need to fill it with words, with conversation, if I'm just spending time hanging out with someone, I mean. But depending on the person's personality, my mother, for example, she loves to fill all the silences.
What types of thoughts do you most enjoy having?
I guess the ones where I am what I would now like to think of as the best version of myself, the one that I want to move closer to, the one that is light and optimistic and thinks about the possibilities and not the way that things can go wrong, or focuses on doing something productive, helping other people, because I'm not that 24/7. I'm not that the majority of the time still, for sure. But those thoughts.
What about your favorite sensory experience?
What's your favorite sensory experience? That is such an interesting question.
I'm curious about it from like there's the thinking intellectual part, and there's like the different things that click when it's not a concrete thought. Like I really enjoy the sudden realization of an intuitive moment, or there's sometimes a really high pitched sound in songs that just tickles in the right way.
High pitched sounds. Okay. Interesting. I wouldn't have seen that coming.
It's a very specific. It's never like a scratch on a chalkboard. It's like a
That's what
very.
I thought of.
It's like a gentle high pitch. Yeah, it's which is why whenever when I was younger and I experienced it, I thought this is so strange. This is so adjacent to the most unpleasant sounds. What is it about this
Yeah.
high tone that feels so pleasant?
Oh, that's a hard one. Because when I think of sensory experience, I go more towards like I guess something a little bit more physical. Water, ocean, floating, maybe. Favorite is a strong word. I enjoy it.
An enjoyable one.
Yes.
What are some of your most enjoyable sensory experiences?
Let's go with floating for sure. I remember, I think I've only tried it once. Tried one of those, like, I think it's a saltwater flotation tank, which is literally like marketed as a sensory experience. I really enjoyed that.
Mhm.
Speaking of silence and sensory experiences, which I got there from the floating, right? Being in Miami, for sure, one of my favorite kind of unplugging moments is when I can just float in the water,
Mhm.
on the beach.
Can you share a story of someone of any species expressing curiosity about you?
It has to be babies, right? I think they're the most curious and kind of neutral, objective, non-judgmental. You want a specific baby?
Sure.
It's actually a few moments that I could think of. There was I'm not great with babies actually. I don't know if they like me, but I'm definitely a little hesitant and apprehensive about them. I didn't grow up with a lot of babies around. I was the youngest one, so I tend to feel a little uncomfortable, and I usually like interact with babies from afar. Like I'll be here, they'll be across the room, and I'll appreciate them from there. Um, so one of my acquaintances, old friends from business school, he and his wife had their first child, Avian, and I went to visit them, and I brought him like some little baby guitar or something like that. But I've never had a baby just jump into like physical closeness and like contact with me. Usually, like I guess they sense that I'm like apprehensive, so kind of like dogs, they're apprehensive too. Yeah, he was just, and I felt so comfortable. And he was just, yeah, he's like showing me all his toys, how I played with his toys. He was like very, very much interacting with me and I guess curious about who I was. And there was another time when I was in Namibia, and this probably wasn't a baby anymore, but it was like, it's probably a toddler. And it was a really cool moment for me because in Brooklyn, I grew up with majority like black friends and always like I mean that's I never experienced their racism, but like I got to hear a lot and I got to see a lot. Um and often I was never on the receiving end of it, right? Because people teased me in school or whatever when I first came to the country, immigrant, don't speak English, all of that, but that's not the same as racism. And this isn't quite either that, but like I was in Namibia and I had a lot of friends that went to the Peace Corps, for example. It's like one of my friends um, went to Turkmenistan. He's black at the same time as I went to Namibia and I'm white. But Namibia is mixed. They have white people too. Anyway, and this kid, like, I don't remember what I was doing. I was at a bank. I was in a line somewhere, and he like turned to me, and maybe it's possible he didn't never saw a white person before, or maybe he just didn't see them very often. I don't know. But they were just staring at me, and they like tugged at their mom, and they like rubbed my skin, and I was like, yeah, this is, I would put this at curiosity level, right? And I remember having that conversation with my friend that was in Turkmenistan, with Erman, because we were like comparing experiences. And I was like, there's a point where I would put it at curiosity. Then the next point would be like ignorance. And then it crosses over into racism when you know better.
How did it feel to be on the receiving end of someone's profound curiosity?
I don't know. It was like I mean, it feels silly to say it was a full circle moment or anything, but it's just like, yeah, I I get it. This makes sense. This is everything. This is, I don't know why my mind is going here. It's kind of how I relate to death now, right? Before I had a close person pass away, it was always from a distance. So I was like, oh, yeah, I can logically explain how human beings are this way, or they're flawed, or they're curious, or you just take it stoically, logically, unemotionally disconnected, right? And then when it happens closer to you, you're like, oh, okay, I feel it now.
Hmm.
It's it's different. I don't know how to say it. It's one thing to intellectually understand something, and it's another to feel it and experience it, and it humbles you.
That makes me want to change the way I phrased my questions earlier when I asked your favorite thoughts and your favorite sensory experiences. Maybe it should be what are your favorite intellectual things to think and your favorite experiences to experience. That'd be a better distinction.
They're not any easier. Those are even harder.
One of the things that, and I'm sure we're going to keep revisiting this question, maybe as like a motif throughout this entire conversation. I'm fascinated about how I can share a space with someone. We'll look at the same thing, but we'll experience it completely differently, or at least somewhat differently. And I know that I'll never know quite what it's like to be another person, to be you. But I want to see how we can get close to that. I want to understand more about through your unique set of life experiences, knowledge, skills, through the apertures available to you, shaped by your life, what do you see that at least today few others can? Where do you see the more depth, nuance, and intricacy in a room or in an environment than maybe most others, and you can understand more within it?
I don't know. That's difficult. I mean, I also tend to, lean more towards the humble side, and it feels like very very bombastic to be like, oh, this is the situation where I know better, or I feel more, or I have more, a wider perspective. And it's all relative. It depends on the rest of the room. It depends on who's there, what's the set, what's the setting, what are their experiences. The easiest one would be, if it's a situation where maybe people have had, like, they're not well traveled. Maybe they were born in the place and they never left that place and they grew up in that place. And I've just seen more parts of the world. That's probably one. I'm not always the one that's like the most well traveled and has had the most cultural experiences necessarily in every setting. So it does depend. There are definitely people that have experienced more than me as far as that goes. Um, so it just depends. But I think that's a common one. And the one is like this all like internal introspection. It's not everybody's cup of tea. not everyone necessarily wants to spend their pastime analyzing, reflecting, overanalyzing sometimes. Sometimes people just want to watch TV, go to the beach, like do basic things, enjoy life in a different way. So sometimes, especially I think with family, or like childhood friends, people I grew up with, where we've drifted and have developed different favorite pastimes, different curiosities, pursued different things. Our personalities have drifted apart, and not everyone from like those earlier phases of my life understands or can really like dig into things the way that I do, life and the analysis part of it, all the like philosophical aspects.
I think there's a helpful contrast in how you describe this, where you introduced it as like it's not a unique bombastic perspective. Like this is better than, it's a, these are the areas where you've chosen to invest further because they're areas that are important to you. And so it's not, and I think it's important that you emphasize like it's a relative perspective. It's not that this is better than the other. Like these are the things that you were drawn to. Therefore, this is what was available to you, and you get to enjoy that perspective. And maybe because of the choices you've made, there's certain perspectives that aren't available to you that maybe are available to other folks.
It's where like the curiosity pulled me the strongest, probably.
You mentioned travel, and I'm curious to explore that a bit because I know it's a major part for you, part of your life. You emigrated in the 90s from the former Soviet Union to the US.
Yep.
And I'm curious about the ways in which you've embraced continuity with your culture and how you found it stifling.
It's a good question. I wonder how others that know me would answer this. Because on some, yeah, it's tough. On very real aspects, I am very disconnected from my culture. I don't have a lot of Russian speaking Eastern European friends. I could count them on one hand. I don't even know if I need all the fingers, probably. Not really into, I don't know. What would people do? They would like, listen to certain types of music or watch certain types of TV or films or read certain books. I don't necessarily, that's not where I'm pulled to. If I were to do that, I would be like making an effort, kind of doing homework, keeping up. But I have invested a lot, especially at this point, it's gonna, when I was younger, it feels like yesterday, but at this point, it's been a while. I would I was the one that had the curiosity to like always go back and travel, to visit family, to try to, you can say keep the ties, but for me, it was really build them because I was so young when I left. I felt like I had to almost build them
Mm.
anew as a young adult because they didn't, they don't know my personality. They didn't know all these experiences that I ended up having in the US. So, in those ways, that's how I would say I kept it. I mean, I basically had to relearn the language probably two times if you want to count it that way. And I made efforts into that. Those were conscious decisions. Curiosity led, probably. I think it's been in phases, is the best way that I can put it. So right now, it doesn't feel like a strong phase, so it's difficult to say that I have. And I don't know if the down phases where I'm not super into it, I'm not actively investing, um, necessarily mean that it's because it was stifling. I don't know. It's interesting that you put that part in there. I think very early on, like high school, this is often how I try to tell the story because I have a hard time explaining why. I guess when we first came here, I ended up being drawn to people that are different, of different cultures, of different races. Like it feels like people, there was a fork in the road. Like either you stay with your kind, especially as an immigrant, right? You either get pulled closer to like your community and your sense of same and comfort, or you just go left. I'm going right, or you go left. um, and I chose to go left. I can't quite ever fully explain that, but I often talk about like the classic scenarios. And I mean, literally, I can like remember this, right? I would be at lunch in the cafeteria at school, and I would see all the, it's so difficult because I feel like we need to be more careful with language now around this, but like Russian speaking kids, the diaspora, the Eastern European diaspora, they would all be sitting at the same table because especially for us at that age, like it didn't matter whether you were from like Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Russia, Ukraine, whatever. Like if you spoke English, you were in the Russian category and Russian speaking. They would all be on the same table together. And for the most part, they would only interact with each other. And it felt insular. And it's one of the reasons I think I pulled away from it. But I can't explain why I felt that way. But I wanted to more so choose the other side that was more different, something new to learn. I don't know what it was. Maybe just more embracing of different people, not just all same. So maybe that's the slightly the stifling part of the culture that had an impact on me early, and then I just continued doubling down eventually.
You raised an important point around when someone emigrates, you choose, you have this fork, more of the same, trying to survive together, or more of an assimilation and kind of embedding. And sometimes the more of the same is also isolating. And it seems like you chose the less isolating perspective, and that allowed you to connect more. Because if you stuck with the same group, that would have isolated you from the new place you were in. There was a change. You were in a fundamentally different land, and so being around those who are effectively the same would it's like having moved without having moved.
Yeah, but take a look at New York. That's what the is it fair to say the majority does? I mean, there's so many neighborhood communities and they do exactly that. But they also do that because it
Mm-hmm.
works for them.
Mm-hmm.
It feels good to them. It supports them. They didn't feel that way for
Mm-hmm.
me at that time, and I don't know why. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I was also like a very sad child, teenager. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a correlation between me like choosing other and I don't know, the sadness. I don't know what it is. I never thought about it that way.
Well, so you grew up in a neighborhood that was very culturally similar.
Yeah, the first neighborhood we moved to when we came to the U.S. in Brooklyn. Yeah, it was mostly Russian speaking. Gotta, I don't know what countries people were even from. I know they were Russian speaking, and the second one was like half Russian speaking, half majority Chinese. I guess I don't know. It was kind of mixed, I suppose.
You mentioned going back, and as you described it, rebuilding ties, because you didn't really establish them initially because you were young and you didn't get a chance to explore it. I'm curious, what has meeting your own culture and other cultures helped you incorporate into your own life?
For me, it's experiential. I like had a hypothesis, and I experientially proved it out, at least for myself, that we all have like some very we as in humankind have some mostly fundamental common similarities, beliefs. Like I think everyone has the seed and the potential of getting along, and they're more similar than they're different. So it's that. I think it's just sometimes easier for me to see it than others that don't necessarily believe it or haven't had that experience. Because I remember, I mean, it's actually interesting reestablishing the ties. I mean, and if for me, I felt like I had the ties. I felt like I was continuing to build because as I evolve and grow, I and they did as well, right? I wanted to continue building that relationship. But I had several situations where I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the moving, maybe it's just me being like a very emo child. I felt really strong ties and a pull to certain family members. And when I would go back, I would still think of them that way and treat them as such. But they didn't maintain that anymore. They were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you not why are you here? But it was even in the way that we would speak to each other, right? Uh, I think I still approach life that way oftentimes. Like I just don't have the like the veil. I go straight for the authentic and straight for the personal. I don't like necessarily do the small talk often. Um, and that's the way I approached them. I was like, oh, remember me? Like we were like, you know, camping together and we were like huddling and building forts. That's exactly still how I related to them. But they that wasn't top of mind, that wasn't close for them anymore. And I never got to rebuild some of those relationships actually. And I remember like literally having conversations of like, no, but why are you like holding me at an arm's length? Why can't we be that way? That's what we are. That's what we had. And they couldn't even have that conversation with me. Also, maybe my language wasn't that great. I could have not been expressing myself in the best way. And then when I went to Namibia, one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of see if the struggles that I saw or my family and I had in Ukraine, like poor, I don't know, second world, third world country, whatever you want to count it back then, how similar or different it would be in a totally different place, totally different culture, totally different setting, or how similar. That's one of the things, it's kind of one of the hypotheses in my mind that I wanted to see. And for me, I felt like I was, maybe it was just me on my end, but I felt like I was really able to connect with people. And it felt like a lot of shared experiences to me.
Is that experience with social ties a common theme for you? Where, and I may be interpreting this in a very distinct way, so correct me if this is going askew. Your association or your perception of the intensity of a bond is greater than the other person's perspective. Like, and for instance, maybe it was you two were very close initially, and then you maintain that level about that person, but for them, their relationship with you has faded a little bit more, and so when you meet again, you're still kind of here, and
Yeah.
they've faded a little bit to here.
Manifested in different ways. Like that is the strongest example with like those specific family members that I'm thinking of. But I've had, when I was younger, especially seasons with friendships where maybe it was like that. But that was more of an ebb and flow of a friendship that I didn't quite understand. I find it, definitely used to find it very hard to let go, particularly of people and relationships. Goes for like significant others as well. So that's the other manifestation of it. I think that it's easier now, like with the internal introspection, with the meditation, with the one of the things I really wanted to work on just over the past few years, getting out of my last relationship that was really difficult for me to move on from, was like this ability to just let go, not feel like I have to force a relationship or keep trying to reconnect, maintain it, and just understand that they ebb and flow and sometimes they just dissipate.
Between your travels and career path explorations and journeying inward, what are the different layers of what you've been searching for across different phases of your life?
I think with all the moving around, it was definitely thinking that I would find some kind of like external, magical, perfect place where I was like, oh, yeah, this is where I'm meant to be. And I mean, maybe that could almost be like searching for home, right? Because everywhere I was going, I can't say it was necessarily with the intention of like, oh, okay, I'm moving here. I am going to this place because I'm gonna like trial out living the rest of my life here. But everywhere I spent a significant amount of time, and I mean, we're talking like more than a month, I always had this like thought exercise and this phase where I was like, I was daydreaming, right? I was imagining my life here. I was imagining how I could just settle, this could just be it. I was always doing that simulation, I call it, that thought exercise. And I think in a sense that's searching for home, I suppose, externally. And every time, I don't know, something came up or I realized that I couldn't see it anymore, or I thought like I kind of did some magical rough math in my head and I was like, this is low probability, this is probably not going to work out, or whatever it was. And I would move on to the next place. In a sense, in like a very weird way that probably didn't seem like it to anyone outside of me, it was methodical of like going through a process of elimination. And so, sometimes I would have to go through it multiple times because I have a habit of going back to places thinking like, oh, okay, well, maybe this time, maybe it's different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the situation. And maybe it's the letting go of like the idea of the place that I had in my head. But yeah, I think it was just searching externally for something that made sense, because it's this like it's this magical moment where like it all clicks and it all makes sense. And by all, I mean like, why are we here? What are we doing here? What am I meant to be doing? Where am I meant to be living? Who am I meant to be living with? Like just everything. the, the place that probably doesn't exist.
It almost sounds like you were auditioning different environments for, does this feel like home and can I make it a home?
Yeah, in a way, you can say that.
When did you experience homesickness, and what were you homesick for?
See, this is a good question because for example, right, the logical answer, if anyone was to like see my life on paper, look at the facts, home is New York, right? Home should be New York. I I don't think I've ever felt homesick for New York. So that already doesn't make sense. When I feel homesick, it's usually for other places that I've been, which is why I tend to go back to some of them. But is it homesickness? It's more like that daydream, right? That like idealization about that simulation that I was doing of like, well, maybe I can make it work this time. It's the idea of the place and the life in that place that I had in my head. That's the homesickness. What do you think of when you think of homesickness? What does it feel like to you?
In recent years, it's been when I get back to here and I just hear the silence. Because most frequently, if I'm visiting somewhere in the last several years, it's been a larger city, New York, Salt Lake, and Miami. And
Hmm.
when I get back, I hear the crickets. I hear the silence in my books beckoning me to read them, and the winds of the trees, wind in the trees. So I think it's a spaciousness for thought and self. Whereas when I'm in a place like the city, I'm intentionally going there to interact and to connect and to mingle. And I know that I don't get a chance to rest or recover from that until I get back, because even when I go back inside into an apartment or where I'm staying, it's it's still so noisy around that there isn't a place for me to process.
Hmm.
And
You
that was one
deplete
of the
your
reasons I needed to
battery.
get out of New York City.
Do you feel the homesickness, or do you realize that you're homesick only when you get back, or you're longing for it while you're somewhere else?
I'll look at my security cameras and like, oh, I want to be back there.
Really?
Like
Wow.
that's the place. That's well, it's like it's checking on them to be to be responsible, and also like, oh, that's where like that feels nice. That place, I know what that place means. I know that when I'm there, I will be away from this level of excess stimulation.
It's your happy place.
And I've thought about like, well, was it a happy place or is it like a place of excess comfort or a
Hmm.
comfort zone? Like, in what way am I pushing myself here? And so I've also shifted that relationship to how can I turn this place into me accomplishing more of my goals. And I think from that perspective, it also feels more like home, because some of those things I can't accomplish elsewhere. I've created an environment for myself here of like, this is where I'll create, this is where I'll reflect, this is where the things that feel most me are here. And they're harder to do elsewhere.
I hope I'll feel like that one day. It sounds nice.
In fact, when I travel, I feel guilty because I feel like I'm a spectator, not a participant. I'm not bringing something to the environment. I'm just walking around and ogling the people in the culture, rather than somehow I'm contributing and trading with them.
But is that
And it
fair
almost
to
feels like
say that of yourself?
I think when I was younger, that wasn't the case. There, I was really curious about the culture. I wanted to take it in, And now I feel it's, look, I have several creative projects that I need to make, and I want to go to these places to share them, and therefore meet the people who are really there and not just go to the tourist sections. Like there's a flow
Oh,
of life that occurs in a city or an environment I'm visiting, and I feel as if I'm partaking recreationally rather than immersing with that way of life. And it feels more voyeuristic than it does reverent. The example that comes for me regularly, and I think it's like almost like an archetypal thing for me at this point. Like that's what I want to at some point embody and emulate. There's a singer, Damien Rice, and maybe a decade ago, he just sailed along the coast of Europe, just stopping off in some places, and he's reasonably well known in those areas, just playing with the crowd, playing music, having private,
yeah,
reasonably small
that's
private
really
shows
cool.
or semi-public shows, and then people would join him. I was like, that's an exchange. That is whatever. There's a sort of you were talking about the universal and the unique. What did we share in common? Like communicating that and embracing that. That's what I'd like to be able to encounter. And I think as just a tourist, if I'm just going to these, I think maybe that's different between a tourist and a traveler.
Yeah,
Or maybe
for
I need
sure.
another, like maybe a third word there, but definitely like the idea of just touring something doesn't feel
But I think it could be smaller
embedding
than that,
enough.
right? As long as there's one connection, as long as there's one meaningful interaction, that's participating,
Mhm.
that's contributing.
Yes, yes. One connection every day. That way, every day. Yeah.
Per trip.
Well, the people, I remember having these wonderful connections when I went to this semi artsy city in Mexico. But the people I had the really strong interaction with were expats.
Ah, okay.
So like, yes, they've kind of connected to this space, but it didn't feel like they were native to it, and I didn't feel quite like I still wasn't really participating within, despite having really great connections with those folks.
Were they also just traveling, just visiting?
Some were living there temporarily, but extended temporarily. Others had made it their home.
I mean, they're living there. I see what you mean, though. I often try to kind of keep an eye for that as well. Speaking of that, like cafeteria lunch table, right? Like sometimes when I travel to certain places and I'll see like all the Americans or all the like foreigners huddled together, I'm like, I remember actually even feeling that just in Seattle. Doesn't have to be international travel. One of my gripes, like the 4 years that I was there, I kept feeling like I can't find a community. I couldn't picture it as a home. Kept thinking that this wasn't it and I needed to leave because it was so hard to find someone outside of the circle that I was expected to be in. The other MBAs, the other transplants that just moved there and were just working at like Amazon, Microsoft, whatever, like the few companies, the few tech people. There's nothing wrong with them, but I
Mhm.
just, it's not what I wanted for my circle. I wanted who's from Seattle? Like, where's any other profession? Where's just more diversity and background thought, where they're from, whatever. I wanted someone different from me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's this notion of like, what does it mean to be from this place, from this culture? Like, and what is the Seattle-ness of this? Who embodies the Seattle-ness? The ness of anywhere.
I mean, maybe a certain part of it is also like because at Seattle at that time, tech was taking over. It had been a while and it was building up. And the people really from Seattle, like, I don't know, the one time I would go to some bar and it'd be like a local bartender that is from Seattle or had been there for decades and is like, this is not Seattle anymore. Like, you guys are taking over. You're like, we can't live here anymore. And the vibe is different. Everything has changed. It's the people that feel the change versus the people that are bringing the change. And also,
Hmm.
if you take it to an international perspective, of course, when you have like all these richer Western tourists coming to a third world country and their own, it's there's some kind of element of that to me that I look for when I think about who's really from there and like who belongs versus.
You mentioned the idea of a circle or a community, and the ones that you've cultivated. What role in a community comes most naturally to you to take on?
Is there one? I mean, I often feel like I never feel like a part of the community. That's one. Even I have all of these friend groups, circles. I often feel like I'm the one with half a foot in member. So in communities, I think it's often that I'm not the one that's like all in. I'm not the one in the center of the community. I'm not the one building it necessarily. I'm on the periphery. Is that a role? The periphery member of a community?
Mm-hmm. The one who is in the center of many Venn diagrams.
Hmm. It's a very positive way to flip it. I appreciate that. That could be true.
Being on the periphery also keeps someone safer because it means that you're not overwhelmed or overtaken by any one ideology, any one perspective. And inherently, you grew up at the overlap of several,
Right.
none of which felt like home. And so, and if you're always looking for home, like there's this,
Right.
it's almost
It's hard to be all
every
in,
single one. Yeah,
be settled.
because but it also means you're able to kind of jettison the expectations of any one group because you're not bound by them. And should you leave, you don't lose your entire community.
But also, how does it work? I've often struggled with this, right? Because I look at these groups, these friend groups, even that I'm in, and they just make so much sense for them. The majority of them, maybe I'm overly simplifying it from my objective standpoint, right? That's probably not how they feel internally now that I'm saying it out loud. But to me, like, it makes so much sense for them to be in the group. The group is like them, they have so much in common. And for me, I like have some points of connection, but there's so many pieces that are often missing. There isn't any one circle I can think of that encompasses enough of me for it to make sense.
How do you think the many sides of you work together, and how do they clash?
Lately taken to calling it a ball of contradiction. I think my friend may have coined that term. I'm not sure. She's very like, she says crazy stuff. She tells it like it is I mean, with me anyway, she doesn't filter. I think at one point she was visiting me in Miami, maybe last year. And she just like, I don't remember what I was saying, but she paused for a second. She looks at me and she's like, you just don't make sense, right?
What are the contradictory parts?
There's like this hippie part now, sort of half hippie. I'm like half everything. There's the half hippie part. There's like the half, literally the half Russian part. I'm half Russian. The half immigrant, the half kid that grew up in like the inner city in Brooklyn, the half that's like in a historically black sorority, the half that I could just go on. But it's like a lot of pieces that you wouldn't necessarily fit together into one person. The tech stuff,
You said
right? I'm like liberal and I'm like for people's rights and I'm sometimes anti-capitalist, but I'm like over here, doing angel investing. Like,
what sort of conflict have you had between being yourself and belonging?
I mean, I guess that's the conflict. The reason why I never feel like I fully belong anywhere is because it doesn't feel like it's always all me. But I don't even know if that's possible at this point. I truly do feel like I think I've been fortunate and privileged enough to live like many lifetimes so far, and my life is not even over yet. And sometimes I just feel like I've done too much and seen too much and been in too many places for that to be possible anymore.
So home is then only around the people who've done something similar.
And
You
then
can't unexpand.
it doesn't quite work that way. Like I have a good amount of friends that are in the foreign service. They've been in USA. So in some ways, they can understand. We can commiserate. We can have great conversations around this. But it's a different outlook. It's a different personality. They want different things in life. They have a different approach. So no, not necessarily. At the end of the day, we are all very unique snowflakes, right? Like the thing that makes you you and like the environments, the set of experiences, the background, the generations, the genes, like all of that combined there's no one else like you. And if I'm ever searching for someone that is exactly like that, I'm not going to find it. That's part of the beauty of being unique, a human. You're just you. There's no one else like you.
I want to come back to this soon about this idea of who we are, what we're searching for, like what's complementary and what is same. But before that, I'm curious. You mentioned you've lived all these lifetimes, and you've traveled, you've explored, shifted career paths, you've viewed the world and work and personal mission from so many angles. And I think a core part of that is questioning. And I'm curious about what is it about that inescapable aspect of you that makes it so imperative for you to question and even occasionally jettison contemporary expectations of yourself.
When I was younger, that sadness we were talking about, I think in a way it's been a superpower. I don't think I would have ever explored as much as I have, done as many of the things that I've done if I didn't have that. Because a good number of times it felt sort of like a last resort. It was that process of elimination of like, this doesn't feel good. I'm not good here. So logically, logically, I may as well try something else. I may as well do something else before I give up. That was my reasoning when I was younger, for sure. So that kind of got me through a good few first lifetimes. And now, I mean, I think it's a little more optimistic than that. I don't, well, actually, the past few years, it's been a little more optimistic than that. So when I try, I think, oh no, there must be a different way. There must be something else I could try. Like there must be a way that I could optimize or I could make this experience better for me or for someone else. But I also don't, I don't know. Am I still searching? Am I still going through lifetimes? I don't know. That's a different question. I don't know what's happening right in this moment. In some ways, I am. And
Oh,
old habits die hard.
what different titles have you auditioned for your current phase?
True story. I don't remember which. I'm on dating apps. On one of the dating apps, it was like I guess a suggested question, and the question was like, what chapter would you title your current life or your life right now? Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's where I'm at. I think it just came out so quick, and I'm like, this is every time I see it, I'm like, that is spot on. That is very appropriate. That's what's happening right now.
You referred to your that sadness, and you said that in more recent times it's been optimistic. Do you have a name for that side of you
The
that
more
feels
optimistic side.
well? I guess the this that this core that was once upon a time sadness and led you to explore so much that you have, and now it's a little bit more optimistic. So calling it sadness feels almost anachronistic because it's taking you elsewhere, or might be it's Anya-chronistic
I don't
to
know.
call it that.
I don't know what to call it that, but it's the part that is not sad anymore. That has, oh, this is scary to say because I don't think I've actually said these words out loud. Um, Tells you a lot for where I've been, but that that realizes that like I'm okay, that this is okay, even if like it's just like this till I die. This is good, but it could still be better. And why not try to make it better? It's that part.
How do you nurture that part, and what does it feel like to neglect it?
Not meditate, that's for one. I think it was during the pandemic, probably around the time when we connected. I don't know if I mentioned it then. I remember I wrote a blog post on it. There was, I don't want to butcher it. There was I think her name is Laurie Santos. She's like a professor at Yale or something, and she did this happiness class. She had started doing it just for her like undergrad students at Yale, and then she put it online. I think on Coursera. A bunch of people did it during the pandemic. Like it went viral. I did the course, and like sometimes some of these books, like I'm doing the artist way now, also a perfect example. Some of these books, some of these courses, you can listen, you can read, but the whole point and what you really get out of it, if you do it properly, is like to actually do the exercises, do the process that they're describing. So when I did her course, I did everything, like everything. Did all the homework, all of that stuff. Um, and I don't remember if it was one of the homeworks, the exercises, or what, but I just like came out with this conclusion, which is silly because I mean, like logically, I could have told myself this before, but again, it's like you might know something intellectually, and it's different when you experientially have the evidence and you feel it. It's that conviction is the confirmation that makes it visceral, makes it real for you. And it was sleep, exercise, and meditation are essential for me to feel good. Very basic. Makes sense. Like that's on everybody's list, or whenever you read like, one of those articles about how to feel better, those three things are often on there. Like it's not surprising, but it's that essentially. That's what nurtures that part of me.
And what does it feel like when you know that you're not when then you're not doing those things? And by not doing, like, yes, it's the not meditating, it's not sleeping, it's not exercising, but it's also not doing the types of courses or work to connect to that side of you. Where does that lead you to?
Not getting out of bed. I mean, that's the simple way to put it. It's physically what happens, but it's the part where I disconnect. I tune out from the world. I'm not talking to people. I'm not doing anything. I'm not leaving the house. I'm not doing any of the healthy habits. Eating well is probably another one in there. But yeah, I'm not my best self. Or I'm not living, really, is what I would call it. I'm existing in a way.
Hmm. When you are living, when you think about the life that you want to lead or you hope to lead, what are the values that you've aspired to embody?
I am connected, which means to myself, as a reformed atheist, I can say to like something else that's out there that is not another person. The energy source. I don't even know what to call it. I'm still not sure if I believe on it, but believe in it. But like I think something is there. So it goes beyond myself. But myself connecting to myself is also connecting to that, whatever that is. And then also connected to the world around me. So that means, am I speaking to my friends? Am I there for my family? Am I participating in the world, in the community? Am I giving back somehow? I feel like I've gotten way too much in life and done way too much to not somehow give back. I think that piece always has to be there because I often entertain of like, oh, I'm just gonna go do art. And in those simulations, I struggle with the part that like, how does that help people? How is that meaningful? How do I still contribute? But I also am doing something artistic, whether it's, I don't know, hobby, passion, or profession.
Since you've defined these values, have you had an experience of feeling as if you're not moving towards them or maybe even drifting away from them?
I think it's been very difficult for me to move towards all of them at the same time. So it often feels like at least one is missing or one is being less invested in. That's the struggle right now.
Which of them feels most frightening to practically implement? And what would you have to sacrifice to do it?
I think I'm going to answer a different question because it's not that any one of those feels frightening. There are different things that are frightening for me that apparently aren't important to me in values, which was interesting clarity to just get. But when I think about those things that I just said are important, it's that I want them in balance. I don't want just any one of those to be like all encompassing. So the frightening part is not finding the balance of being able to do all of them at the same time. Because I feel like that's where my happy place would be if I could have elements of each of them active at once in my life.
Would you be open to sharing the clarity you just referenced that you just got?
Yeah, because when you ask me like what I'm afraid of, like back to this chatbot, I often feel like a fraud, especially lately, because right, I advise founders, I've been in tech forever. I have like all of the things on paper, and I am like deathly scared of putting myself out there and saying, I am going to build this thing. This is me and I'm doing it. And it's so right. It's the like, it's okay if I fail. It's okay if it's not like some like magical, amazing thing that everybody loves and uses and it just like takes off and is viral and has a life of its own. I'm scared of all that stuff. I'm scared of putting myself out there in that way. I guess more so professionally, independently professionally, where there's no like company team behind me, where I'm not hiding behind someone else's name or someone else. Like it's just all my stuff on the line for me. That's the part that scares me. But I didn't say anything about that when you just asked me about my values.
You're taking the artist's way, you're applying it to entrepreneurship, and you're living the entrepreneur's way. You're not just reading it, but you're actually living it.
You know, that wasn't the motivation for doing the artist way. It was more so to double down on like the art stuff that I've been exploring over the past few years. But I did recognize that it could be helpful because when they talk about the blockers, I see and I feel those blockers with the entrepreneurship stuff for sure. So I think it could be very helpful to building a software or whatever physical product, creating anything. It doesn't have to be artistic or like what you would stereotypically define as artistic.
You mentioned that you've been getting more into art stuff lately, and different sides, furniture making and painting and different art classes. I'm curious about what sides of yourself have you only recently given yourself permission to explore?
It depends on what you mean by recently, but I would put all of the art stuff in that category. Like I had the first art class that I remember like since I was a child, definitely since high school, like I wanted to do these things and I had the curiosity. I remember like roaming through art stores and like even buying stuff, but I didn't know what to do with it and I never touched the pastels and it was that idealizing daydream that I was doing that I could like I remember thinking of art schools when I was thinking of college, but never did anything, never actually even tried. So the first art class that I ever actually took was a few years ago. It took, well, I don't know. It's, maybe it's connected. A lot of things happened at the same time. My father was passing away. We had him on home hospice. And that is literally when I signed up for my first art class. So it was since then that I allowed myself to do those things, to explore it.
Have you explored this inseparable theme of the overlap between creativity and death, or the interplay between the two?
When you say that, it makes complete sense. But no, I have not thought about it that way. I think of like movies you would watch, right? It reads like a script, right? You know, you're one of your parents, someone that's like central and fundamental to your life is passing away. So it makes you question your own mortality and like what you have and what you haven't done and how life is short. So often, you know, the main character goes out and like does something crazy or maybe something small, but it's something that they've been putting on the back burner or they were too scared to do before. So it makes sense that that's maybe what it was. It's not what I thought it was, or that's not how I was thinking about it at the time.
What's a question you regret not asking your father?
I'm tempted to say I don't have one, but that seems like a very naive answer. There must be one, right? It's difficult because I feel like, especially when I was younger, I tried. Like I've tried because I've been this kind of internally inquisitive. What is the world? Why are we here? All of those questions for a very long time since a young age. So I had phases of trying to have those kinds of conversations with my parents, but they were never really receptive. So I think I did try. Maybe I just wasn't satisfied with the answer. My father does have like he had a big more potential, like a little bit of a bigger propensity to go there than my mom did. So I got more kind of those philosophical sort of answers or glimpses from him, but I just wanted to go so much further and so much deeper.
What are the questions that you find yourself revisiting across years?
I mean, it all comes down to the same thing. The just like what is the purpose of life? Why are we all here? what is this? It's just that. I think if I, you know, the five whys, like if I just drill down deep enough into any lingering question I have, I'll always end up back at that place.
Do you hope to be able to conclude and definitively answer anything so that you can then start asking something else for the first time?
So here's the thing. At an intellectual level, at this point, I believe for sure, and I think intellectually I've accepted that I'm not going to get that answer, that it doesn't exist. So I need to move on. But what's the opposite of intellectually? I don't know. At an emotional level, at a feelings level, I know I'm not quite there yet. If I'm being honest with myself, I'm still a little bit stuck on it. It still revisits me. I'm still not able to fully move on. And I sometimes still feel like I need to answer that question first before I like figure out what kind of life I want to live and who I'll be. Sometimes I still feel like I haven't started my life because I need that answer. I know that's wrong. I know intellectually that that's not how it works. I do know that, but I'm still a little stuck emotionally or mentally.
I can very strongly relate to the idea of like I don't think I've started life yet. Like it's like, oh, it's coming. Like this is the preparation. Like it's gonna
Like
be
I'm
after
almost there.
extra.
Just figure it out a little bit more.
Like, no, this is it. Right. This is it. Among the things that are answerable in your life, more broadly, are there any that you hope you could answer within your lifetime?
Emily is one. Like having my own family, or whether that makes sense for me, or like what is that? Like one fundamental question I have, and I mean, I do think it's different for different people. So maybe it's more so like, what would be the effect of family for me? Is it like people just building a family, having a significant other, having kids? Is it just like what you're supposed to do in life, and then it starts to make sense to you, and just you let go of
Hmm.
these other things that you can't let go of? Is It's like, is that what I'm missing? Will that fix it? There's one way to find out, but that's a lot of high stakes to answer that question.
That does, as you're describing that, I immediately went back to your description of the community. Like there's a family would be the place where you're creating a center. And
And
so
you're
then you
at the
are a part of
center.
something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you belong. And then you feel as if things are aligned.
If it all goes well, that's theoretically how everyone hopes it will
Yes.
work.
So then I think this question might be related then. Um, what questions do you hope to ask, but you haven't found the right circumstances or environment to ask them? The questions you're still holding.
Here's the thing, right? So the meditation that I've been doing lately for the past few years of Vipassana is these 10-day silent retreats. It's a method to meditation. It's not the only one. But for me, it's the one that that has worked, where I'm like, oh, I feel something, like I'm getting benefit out of it, right? And typically my personality would be, okay, maybe there's something else. Maybe I still need to try like all these other methods of meditation to make sure that this is the one that I should continue. Like I gotta try them all. And then I'm like, no, this is working for now. This is good enough. Why would I move on to something else if this is good here? Um, that's one, in terms of continuing to ask the questions if you're already in a good space. And then when you're at the 10-day silent retreats, there are assistant teachers, because you're silent for the majority of the whole 10 days, right? You're just like meditating for hours a day. But you have, I don't know, something like 5 minutes where you can have time to, it's called an interview with the assistant teacher. You can ask them questions. They are meant to be, you're not there to like engage in chit chat and have a conversation. You're there to ask pertinent questions to your meditation practice. So maybe you had some question about like the instructions on how to meditate for that day, or position, like my back hurts a lot, or I don't know, something on topic, something relevant. And I overthink everything, right? And I've learned this about myself. I'm also a rule follower. So whereas like other people wouldn't hesitate, would sign up for the interview the next day or like sign up every day and just keep asking lots of questions and just whatever's on their mind, I like in my head think through all the questions. Day one, day two, narrow down the questions. Day three, do I really need to ask these questions? Is this appropriate for this? Is it worth it to ask the questions and break the silence? Is it more worthwhile to stay silent? And will I get like just all of it? And I go through this like, because there's so much time to think, even though, you're not supposed to be thinking, you're supposed to be meditating. So I've taken 3 of these courses so far. And usually right around the like, I don't know, 7th day, I'm just like, all right, this is just go ask the question. Like you're torturing yourself. Like at least you'll be able to move on, right? So I've built it up in my head. I've overthought of it. I come there prepared with my like 1 or 2 questions. We have like the short conversation. And I mean, like in the kindest way, I'm sure they're trained to do this way. They don't give any answers. The answer is always like, go sit, keep meditating, focus on your breath. Like that, no matter what question you ask, even if they answer a little bit in between, the ending theme will just be go sit. And in a way, I think that has kind of helped because like I just don't bother asking questions anymore, but in a good way. Because the answer is not the answer. The answer is pointless. The answer won't give you what you think you need or what you think you'll get out of it. That's where I'm at.
And you sharing that just now, you shared a description of yourself as one who is a rule follower. And I was surprised to hear that. And I was trying to reconcile, like, yes, it makes sense. I mean, she's had a very conventionally studious, accomplished path. The names, the logos, and also there's like this rebellious streak of after having followed the rules, you have questions, and now you're going. Like, does that feel also contradictory? Is that part of the contradiction?
It's kind of like the way that I used to take tests when I was younger. There are a lot of times where I would just focus on the strategy of taking the test rather than actually preparing for the test. That's kind of how I feel about it. So like I want to know the rules. I'm a rule follower in the sense of I want all the rules up front. It gives me comfort to know what they are. So then I can sit there and analyze which ones I think make sense. Will I follow them? To me, it's following the rules if I first inform myself, kind of like am aware, have worked it out in my mind. And a lot of times I do believe in like, I'm a process kind of person in the sense of it's like these experiences that are processes. Like this 10-day course is like it's a tradition, it's a process. Me joining my sorority, it was a process. It was a well crafted, thought out, intentional process. And to me, the rules come in there where it feels disrespectful to disregard or even not finish a process that has been a long tradition that someone has carefully cultivated. So I'm like, okay, well, let me grit and bear, even if I'm not enjoying it. I will finish it and then I'll question it. That's kind of my MO.
Speaking of rules, when have you felt the most free?
What do you mean? What kind of free?
What do you got?
I mean, in a way, in a not too deep way, in a basic way, like in a paper way, I am very free right now. I have the extreme fortune of not having to like work a 9 to 5 job for months at a time if I don't want to. I have the room to explore. I have the means to explore, to travel, to like do whatever I want. Not forever, but for a time. And that's most people don't get that. That is very free. The part that's missing is, do I allow myself to feel free? So even though I have all of that freedom, am I using it? Am I allowing myself to take it? I still have certain parameters, certain boundaries, certain like expectations and impositions that I'm putting on myself. So that weighs down the freedom. So if I were to think about those aspects, I don't know if I ever was ever fully able to let go of all of those yet. That's difficult. That's like, I think that's like ego death level. To truly feel free, you have to be willing to like just set aside and let go and let all of your expectations, all of your shoulds, all of your, just all of that, let it all fall away.
You've started that though. You've written about, and you've taken a sabbatical before of how do I explore these things? How do I explore my shoulds and wants? So you've started on that path.
Yeah, for sure. I'm on the path. Still
Mm-hmm.
feels like the beginnings of it. I also don't know how far on the path I want to go, learning more that I have and experiencing more that I have. Because at a point it's like full dissociation, right?
Oh, interesting. What do you think is on the other side of that for you?
I don't know, but I'm not sure that I want to find out. Because for example, we were talking about family, right? Like building a family is the opposite of heading down to that road. It's almost like, are you going to go be a monk, or are you going to have all these
Mm-hmm.
attachments in your life and build them, build more of them?
If that's a place that you know that you don't want to go, what are some of the places that you know you can't return to? You know that they're not for you. You know you've been there before and you've chosen to exit because you know that whether they've served you for what you need, or you know it's not the type of place to come back to. You've learned those lessons.
I don't know. I don't know that I have that kind of certainty about any of it. Because, like, really practical stuff, right? I haven't had alcohol in years. I've been eating veganish for a while, but I still take a lot of those things on a moment by moment basis. I don't know that I would say I never want to go back to drinking again. Maybe I would. I mean, like, also depends on how short or long life is. Like, if I make it to 80, I don't know. I don't know that I would rule anything out in such a hard way like that. I think, if anything, life has taught me that you never really know. In a way, that's an attachment, right? Like, just saying hard and fast, I will do exactly this or I won't do exactly that. How can, I don't know sometimes how people could be so certain.
Hmm. What are some of the things that you've run away from?
Definitely ran away from corporate America, for now at least. I ran away from, I don't know how to describe this. There's like this younger version of me that was more compliant, isn't the right word, but I was doing more of like what people do. Like, I would dress up and I would go to the club, or I would go to this like fancy dinner, or I would put on makeup, or I would like, I like go a lot of that stuff. I don't know that I would never do that again. And sometimes I have certain moments where like I still kind of tune back into that person, but they're further and fewer in between. So I ran away from, I'm like, what is that? Commercialism? That's too far. I don't know. Like, I still order stuff on Amazon. It's a different version than the one that I used to have. And I'm more conscious of it. And I want it less. And when I feel like I'm in those environments, like going back to like your old circle of friends where people are still doing that, I I feel the urge to run.
What advice do you intuitively know you should take, but you're hesitant or afraid to commit to it?
Probably to leave tech behind. That one, I've had conversations, people have given me that advice. I think I've given myself that advice, but I like scared or not ready, some element of the two, probably. There's that. I mean, yeah, that's at a very fundamental level. The other stuff is more practical. It's the day to day of like, you should exercise. Why aren't you going to do it?
Can you introduce me to your intuition? Where has it guided you?
Well, it's guided me this far. So we're here now having this conversation. Without my intuition or listening to some parts of it, we definitely wouldn't be here. I think for a long time I was running away from my intuition. Maybe what I perceived as like aversion or fear was actually my intuition saying, hey, maybe you should try that. Like I still remember to this day with the meditation stuff. I was in Microsoft, I was in Seattle. This is like, there was a girl that was going on like a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And as soon as she said that, like she sat at the desk next to me, I like turned and I was like, she's such a weirdo. Like who does that? These people in Seattle, like these hippies. And I like just did not want to hear any more about it at all. Because other people came over and they were like curious and I'm supposed to be curious. And they were having a conversation with her and I just like wanted no parts of it whatsoever. And now I would question why it would be like such a strong adverse reaction. I think there was an intuition element there. But in some ways, I'm still fighting with my intuition. I'm not fully comfortable. Like the leaving tech stuff is a perfect example, I think. I don't fully trust what's on the other side. If I were to like full on go all in and just act according to my intuition, that may not have been what you were looking for.
If it's the answer you gave, it's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
You mentioned, back then that you were uncomfortable with the idea of this retreat, and since then you've gone on three, and you've clearly explored from other aspects all along, and you've turned to others for guidance. I'm curious. It's like this two-parter of what were the things that you learned through others that only they could teach you, you couldn't have learned on your own, and then what did you realize you could only learn through yourself? And I think you kind of got at that in terms of the like, yes, you could read the artist's way, but you have to do the artist's way for that. So I guess this is another way of asking that question. Like, what could you only learn through others? What could you only learn through yourself?
I think most of it is through others. I don't know how much I could have learned through myself because myself goes in circles. I think we all often do. And the things that I really value, I think what got me this far on the internal journey anyway, is being able to get out of my head. And I don't think I would have ever been able to do that by myself, for myself. I think that is definitely through others. And it comes in so many ways. I mean, it's as simple as like being able to be in a social setting and not be in your head, or like to dance without inhibition, or to just enjoy the moment, even if it is like superficial. There are friends that I have that are just full of life in the moment. And I was never able to do that for myself. I think those friends showed me how it's possible. First, through just seeing that they're like that, and then trying to, I was about to say trying to emulate it, but that's not right. Like trying to participate in it with them. And then, of course, like the more spiritual stuff. Because I have upbringing wise, I think we were talking about this before, right? Like the communism, the mentality that I was raised with. There's so much doubt and there's so much questioning in anything that's alternative, anything that's meditation, anything that's spirituality. I mean, alternative for me, that's not alternative for other people. That I don't think I would have ever been able to get there myself.
When did someone see something in you that you didn't see enough of or at all in yourself?
I think it's often. I think a lot of times people think I'm more capable than I think I am. It's probably even happening right now, like this chatbot. But my friend that I'm working on it with, Omar, I think that is a perfect example. For sure, he probably sees more in me than I see in myself in terms of like, I can do this, I'm fully capable. And intellectually, I probably know it, but I haven't felt it yet. I've never done it experientially, so it's really difficult for me to believe that. Before before I ended up in tech, I was in business, like finance. And before that, what I actually wanted to do, or what I thought I wanted to do, was biomedical engineering. And I ended up in like my first year of undergrad in all these like honors physics and calculus classes, and like having the hardest time ever. Like I would try so hard. I would study so much. I remember I was in like every office hour with my physics professor. And I was doing miserably, like objectively, like getting 30s on tests. A lot of other people were also, but I counted myself out. And a lot of those professors, a lot of the people around me in that time, like nobody was telling me to quit. Nobody was telling me I can't do it. I was only telling myself.
Earlier, we touched on the idea of how the complementary relationships within a community, and in you going to these classes and thinking, and you self-select it out. You like, this is not where you specialize, and this is not where you excel, and other people perhaps do. I'm curious about, we're primates. We evolved growing up in groups, the overlaps of many different types of relationships of larger groups. I'm curious about how you've relied on relationships to balance or complement you. And then in that, how that's allowed you to be more yourself.
In a way, I don't think I've done that enough. It's a struggle for me. There's some weird balance of when I go to rely on people, and it's like some weird sweet spot of when I'm struggling, but I'm still feeling good. Because as soon as I'm in a down season, a low period, I'm not going to people anymore. Or it becomes very toxic. Like there are a few times when I was in like a very depressive episode, and there are just only a few friends that I have that also have those kinds of depressive episodes. But we would end up being in like a shared depressive episode together. That's not that's not helpful. That's not relying on people. So yeah, it's like it's that weird sweet spot in those moments. And I think in those moments I allowed people to ground me, to check my sense of reality. I've been using this word the past few weeks. I tend to I have a tendency to catastrophize. So it's kind of like letting people help me rein that back in.
Which relationships do you think, and whether current or past, which relationships do you think are missing?
I mean, I've been talking a lot about hoping to find a partner, a significant other. I guess you can say that's missing. I think I also really need to wrap my mind around the fact that I don't, it's, it's not missing, but it would be a nice to have. I'd rather approach it that way. I have a relationship with my mother, but I think it could be a lot stronger, deeper. So in a sense, it's
Mm-hmm.
half missing. I realize what I have a lot. I'm blessed with the friendships that I have. I have a lot of really good friends and supportive friend networks. But because I'm not all in on any one of them, and I'm in many, I often feel stretched thin, and also what I'm getting from them is also reduced. It, it's like a give and take in that sense. So again, I don't know if it's missing, but I often think about one day having one friendship or one circle of friends that I'm like all in to. I don't know if that's possible, but I think about it.
Your answer makes me want to retroactively rephrase the question to, what relationships do you feel an absence rather than something is missing? You mentioned there are things that are nice to have, so you're aware of it, but it's not like it's a hurt. It's a, because sometimes, so an absence could be, I'd like something there or I need something there. Missing
Mm-hmm.
suggests I need something there. And I think there's more room for interpretation of how you'd want to answer it with. Mm-hmm.
Flipped optimistically, it would be, what would you like to have that you don't currently, I guess? Rather than a lack, like, what would you want more of?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, also, humans are humans. I mean, I have moments where I'm like, no, I need a partner. I want a partner. It does feel painful, but I don't think that's the right approach. And it's probably, from what I've learned about the external and the internal, it's it actually, I really appreciated that course that I was telling you about, the Laurie Santos class. There was one particular lecture, I guess, that she did. I think it was in one, or maybe it was featured throughout, but she just dispelled all these myths. Like, we think there's a baseline level of happiness that we have, and we think if we just get this job, or if we just win this lottery, or even if we have the right partner, we will be this much happier. And research shows that we go back to our baseline. And I was just shocked and amazed at that point that it included a romantic partner as well. I was like, that can't be right, but yeah, I see it now.
I remember for my 18th birthday, my brother gifted me the book The How of Happiness by Sonia Lyubomirsky, which is one of the books referenced in the course.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I looked her up after that. That's right.
And she emphasized how, up to 40% of your life is determined just of your happiness of your life is determined by how you interpret something, how you position. Like, I'll be happy if, and I thought, I have been using this as a reference point for so long. And, the brother who gifted it to me, he is more just over a decade my senior. So it was helpful to have someone from a very different perspective and area in life or chapter in life to share his wisdom or the things that he was
Yeah,
learning.
that's amazing to have someone
And
like that in your life.
I've been very grateful for him. And that book, to have that at 18, like I kept hearing my peers, even people slightly older, say things like, oh, if it's some paraphrase of I'll be happy if, or I'll be happy when. I thought,
Hmm.
I think you should, I wonder if,
You should read this book.
but um, that's not, yeah, I don't think, especially then, I wasn't around folks who were curious about those questions about,
But
or
your brother
receptive to them.
was, no?
Yes. Well, peers in my age group.
I see.
This was,
Makes sense.
I was just starting college then.
But so when you read that at 18, did it, for lack of better phrasing, did that hit? Did it fully resonate?
Oh, I mean, I think it resonated in these, expanding circles of, it's something that I've maintained since then. And there's the initial awareness of, oh, that's a very familiar phrase. I need to go further to explore this. But I remember trying to introduce it to I was in my first relationship at the time. I tried to introduce it to her. And here I was thinking, like, this is the person I'm closest with. And she doesn't seem very receptive to it. Well, that's challenging. Where do I share this side of myself?
Hmm.
And so, but it also showed me, like, yes, and there will be times where I might feel very close, but it's still not going to be the closeness that I need, or like there's a certain values overlap that's so necessary for me to be around those types of questioning folks. And maybe she's gone to that place since. Maybe it just wasn't the right time for her to be exploring those concepts.
Yeah,
But
because
certainly then that
the reason
was,
why I asked that is because I do distinctly remember, I mean, and this was slightly younger, like at some point in my teenage years, high school years, I was reading a lot of like Buddhist books. I don't even remember which ones, but I for sure have reread some in adulthood that I read back then. And I read them, I finished the books, but I did not fully connect and process. Like, I don't know if it was the right time. I don't know if I was capable then, but I realized, like, I had been like trying to chip away at this thing that back then I just didn't have access to.
you had the existential qualms, but anything that you read about it yet to wouldn't work just yet. You just kind of, maybe it was, the way I kind of think about this is, yes, I remember having that experience of reading different Buddhism books, different wisdom type books, and thinking, well, I'm grateful this is here, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's answering the daily questions. It's given me something for the bigger questions longer term, but not the day to day side, except for reading about anger. and Thich Nhat Hanh's
Hmm.
writing on anger. That was especially when I was 19 so helpful too. That was my first time really speaking of the relationship. The end of that relationship taught me a lot about anger, and I was like, oh, where do I begin to confront this? And that was within those books.
Hmm.
It's just like, this is a side of myself that I need to turn to those who are wiser on this, because I'm not finding it within. To the same way that you mentioned, like getting out of your head. Like I knew I can't solve something internally that is, I can't internally solve something that's internal. I have to go at least a little bit outward, then bring something new in. I don't have the tools at the time.
That's a really, in a way, powerful place to be. I think sometimes it's very hard for people to get there and admit that and see it and be aware of it.
It was also challenging to do it.
Right. And also act on it, right? Because awareness is just one part.
Would you be open to introducing me to your imagination and creativity?
What do you mean?
You've mentioned your recent creative pursuits. Like, how, if you think of these as characters in your life, how would you introduce them? These new close friends that you've been cultivating.
I think in a way, the artist way has helped give me some language for that I previously like I would have never went there. And I think it goes back to the like upbringing, the like communism, atheism of it all, because I didn't know like the artist's way is surprisingly, I mean, it says it's spiritual. It literally said spiritual guide, but like there's just a lot of references to spirit, to God, to whatever you want to call it. That was surprising to me. In a way, maybe even if I knew that, I wouldn't have necessarily like sought out that book and committed to it. The way that it, because I've had these moments, like the really special moments, the moments where I feel like I have this, I don't know, art does something special for me. It's when I feel like I'm channeling something. It's when I enter a state of flow and I look back on it and I'm like, who made that? How did that just happen? So I guess in a way, it's not. It doesn't feel like it's me. It doesn't feel like it's my character, and it talks about that in the book. It's like it's coming from somewhere else. You're just connecting with something. That first class that I took when I was saying my father was passing away, I took two sculpting classes back to back. It was the first art class I ever took. Never did sculpting before, and I made this whole figure. And then the second class, I made this whole, I guess, like bust of a woman. And by that point, because I had made the first figure, and the first figure wasn't amazing, but to me it was amazing because I was like, how did I make even that? By the second class, I don't know how to explain it. I just like in the class, people plan out what they want to make. They have like reference images. They sketch it out. They're more methodical about it. But I don't know. I just had this like desire to just let my hands move. I didn't know what I was gonna make, and it's a woman. I don't know who she is, but like she she feels real. She exists. Like I made a face. I don't know whose face it is. Like how is that possible? And I had a few moments like that with painting as well. Sometimes, yeah, it's not all the time. Sometimes it's hard to even enter that space, but it's when I get there and then I like come out of the, I don't know, the high or whatever it is that I'm in, and I look around and I'm like, how did this happen?
What impels you to create?
I don't know how to answer that. I never understood it. This is the part where I'm like, I think I was shutting down a lot of my intuition or whatever you want to call it when I was a kid. Because when I think back to like, I kept trying to access something like that, to channel it. Like I was very curious about artistic things when I was young, but I had no example of that in my life. I didn't know anyone that had ever done anything artistic anywhere around me. Literally like zero. And no art class. I don't know what happened. I don't know why I didn't have any art classes. I mean, there's public school, but I'm sure, I don't know. I couldn't understand that pull. Like, I think back then, maybe it was just like, it was this idea of the artist persona. It's this person that is emotional, but channeling their emotions and able to express them somehow. And maybe it's because I had all of them inside and they were killing me and they were stuck in there. Maybe that's what it is. I never thought about it that way. It just came out now. And now it's similar because I remember like those months with my father passing away, and I would have like that class once or twice a week. And I mean, I had those moments. I was recently talking about it. I would show up to the class and I felt guilty for being there. Right. I don't know how many days my father has left. My mom is home taking care of him. Like even just getting away from those few hours felt unfair and selfish. And then I would be taking the train to Manhattan because I was in Brooklyn. And just like, I'm like, it's 2022. I am, however old I was at that time, 37, 36, 36, like whatever. None of this makes any fucking sense. Like the fundamentally the world stopped making sense. It never made sense to me in the first place. And this was even before my first meditation course, any of that. So I didn't yet have a lot of the tools, but I had started trying to grab onto the tools. So I was still really struggling with my own, like, am I crazy? Like, what are we all doing here? I had zero answers or ways to think about any of it. And then my father's dying. And I'm going to this art class and I'm just like, I'm not okay with any of this. None of this makes sense. I don't understand the point to any of this. Why are we all here? Like, what is all of this? We're all just in pain, living painful lives. And then I would leave the class. And it was long enough because I think it was like 3 hours, maybe 4 hours. It was a long period of time. So not every class, but like I would enter the flow. I did something with my hands. I was building the sculpture and I would leave and I would like go for a walk through Central Park before I would get back on the train. And it was night. There were lights out, and I would just like sit there on a rock for a few minutes, and I'd be like, I get it. This makes sense. I can't tell you why I felt that, but I did. Even in those moments, something just made sense about it. It almost gave it meaning. I didn't know what to do about that and how it made me feel. Like I still don't, honestly, because I'm like, oh, what does this mean? Am I gonna go to art school? I still don't know what to do with it, but maybe if I piece everything I've learned together, it doesn't have to mean anything. I don't have to do anything with it. I just get to have it and I get to experience it sometimes.
As you were getting more involved with art, especially during this liminal period in you and your family's life, how were your dreams affected?
I don't remember. I think crazy dreams only started. Oh no, I take it back. I did do Vipassana before my father got sick. My first course was right before. I was gonna say my crazy dreams only started afterwards. um, yeah, I can't remember dreams. I don't know.
How do your dreams influence your waking life?
I don't think they do much. For me, it's more so my meditation, my sits. Because I don't remember my dreams often. And definitely before the like more concentrated meditation, most of the dreams that I would remember or able to vaguely reference, it'd be more of that like deja vu element. It'd be like a very, it would feel just like an average day. It wouldn't feel like anything atypical. And I would just be like, huh, did I dream about that? This is vaguely familiar. I wouldn't know if it was a real day or a dreamt day. It wasn't, I don't know if maybe there were others that I just wasn't recalling or what. Um, since meditating more, I've had more vivid dreams that you can maybe read into, interpret, but I haven't focused on that as much. And sometimes, like, especially while you're at the 10-day, you're not supposed to write anything. Like, the point is to not, like, use any cognitive processes. But when I went back to serve, if I'm, like, volunteering for a course that someone else is sitting, I'll write stuff down. So whenever there were periods where I had dreams come up or even something in meditation, and then I would like obsessively start taking notes, start trying to analyze it. And I never even looked back on that stuff. And I was like, this is not the point. I don't know. That's the conclusion that I've come to for me.
Can you go back to what you were sharing about the sense of things making sense when you were sitting in the rock post sculpting, post
Post
walk through the park, or mid walk through the park?
sculpting high.
Have you been able to access that type of clarity since? That type of cohesion?
In other moments with art, yes. And a few moments with meditation. Not just meditation. I mean, like, there might be a day I have like a few favorite places in Miami. And it's interesting because I'm not making art in those days. I would call it more like activating my, I don't know, like random roaming explorer mode. It's days where I just like go out alone and I'm not on my phone. I'm not listening to music. I'm just wandering, wandering.
Why not
And
both?
yeah, probably both. I was gonna say, and sometimes in those moments I tap into that also. They're all lonely
You,
times though, in a way. Solitary.
I was not solitary or lonely.
Solitary. Alone but not lonely. If that's solitary, that's what I mean.
Several years ago, you described yourself as being on an existential career search, which I understood that phrasing as also being existential search more broadly. This was within your blog posts. And you've worked in virtual worlds and digital music at vast scales. And now not and you have been for in recent years exploring fundamentally tangible creative outlets. I'm curious about what you think of the significance of exploring creative outlets that are tactile and deliberately slow and irreconcilably individual in quantity, as opposed to something at scale.
So when I talk about leaving tech and that gut, that intuition, that's what it says. There are a lot of benefits to being in tech. There's also a lot of good that one can do. But on some like deep internal level, if I was being honest with myself, I don't think it's for me. I don't think it's best and well suited for what I need to be my best self. I think there's a contradiction and a conflict there. So that slow, that tactile, I think that's what feeds my soul, if there is a soul, for lack of a better way to put it.
What sides of yourself feel underexpressed?
That part, I think, is still underexpressed. I don't do it regularly. I've tried to more so now, but there's a type of therapy called IFS, internal family systems. Are you familiar with it? So I
Mm-hmm.
think there's some, let's call it part of myself that just yearns, that needs to do that. And because I haven't fully worked out the structure, the space in my life, the framework for like how that this will always be there and be a part of my life, of our lives. If I think of all the parts, that part is just like not settled and not comfortable because it doesn't feel reassured that that will always be there. So in that way, it's underexpressed.
I know that feeling very well of how can the responsible, studious, professional side
Yeah.
create the safety for the underexpressed, dismissed, quieted, neglected, creative, delicate side come out. And like, how am I promising myself I'm going to make space for that? Because when there's professional things that need to be done, like it all gets shushed,
And
and
it takes
despite being
priority,
promised.
right? It's the first thing to go. The inner
Mm-hmm.
artist is what the artist way calls it. You should check it out if
In
you
this,
haven't.
it's upstairs. I do my morning
Oh,
pages.
okay.
No, I say that with more certainty than I should have. I have started doing the morning pages, then I've stopped and I've started again. And this morning was just so wonderful to wake up into this space of just this liminal, intuitive. There's just some modes of thought available in the morning that are so lovely, and then as soon as I go for my phone, they just vanish. And I think
Yeah.
I want that, but I also crave that type of like intellectual pleasure that I know comes from that, and it's these reconciling these two sides. It's even a mode of thinking that comes from that. I know that I need to interrupt in the mornings, and I sat with it longer than I let myself typically, and I know that I love that feeling, and I know that I'm more myself when I have that, because I had it last night before bed, and like I know what led to it. Like that feels like the timeless
Mm,
human creative, like what you described earlier, of that expressive human who feels a lot and is able to express, like that artist archetype.
yeah.
Being attuned to that is just such a. It just feels right on every corporeal, visceral way.
It's like that moment where you still know that nothing changed. It still doesn't make sense, but it kind of makes sense anyway.
Yeah. Am I understanding correctly that you're moving towards the creative is also overlapped with your moving towards the sacred? You mentioned yourself as a reformed atheist earlier.
Did I? I guess so. I think they are connected. I just had no idea. I didn't know what I was doing and that it was going to converge.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it felt totally separate at the time.
I'm curious, in your explorations of late, your reformation as an atheist, where do you encounter the sacred?
I mean, I think for me, it's mostly those three things and possibly a fourth that I still don't know quite what to do with. One is like in that flow state of art, which is not every time, right? It's sometimes if I'm able to access that flow state. Meditation practice, the artist way, maybe, who knows? Like the more that I am willing to be open minded and entertain that this is a thing and lower the inhibitions and the like cognitive noise, the more I'm able to access that space. Not like as a rule every time, but I have a little bit more of a formula in a way. It's the part where I get out of the way and I just let my hands do the work when we're talking about art. The second one was in those like solitude, alone but not lonely moments that I was talking about, where I wander and wonder. Then meditation practice. And also, like, meditation is kind of similar to art in that sense. If anything, it's probably even more rare in meditation. It's the fewer, like, meditation sits rather than the majority of them where I access that. And the fourth one that I'm kind of considering like a half that I don't know quite to do with is like people and feeling love. You know, there's a certain, with certain people in certain moments of connection, you feel something, but sometimes I wonder, just because it involves another human being, if it's fundamentally flawed and it just has, you know, it's sort of like your idea of it, your idea of the person, your expectations. It's not, is it really pure? Maybe is the question that's in my head.
When have you felt a profound sense of interconnection,
With
being a
another
part of
human.
everything?
Oh, not necessarily humans.
Yes, and
Nature. So those wandering moments are often outside, at least, or in nature. I don't think I have enough experience to say it, but probably with animals. Like if I had a pet, I would probably feel that more often, I'm guessing. I think the the foundation for it, the opportunity, the seeds for it are there in the little glimpses that I felt with animals. Interconnection. With people, it's weird and it's rare for me because I think, especially and like at like a on a wider level, on a grand scale, I'm not really good in big crowds, and usually I get in my head, and that's the opposite direction you would need to go to feel that. So it makes me think of carnival. This other contradictory part of me that makes no sense is the part that discovered like a Trinidadian style carnival and soca music. Very specific. And I would wear the costume. I would like be in the parade, be in a band, be walking down the road, or sometimes there are like parties called fet versions of it. And they're the like often the ones where I feel it strongest, the ones where they're like uh, the less formal kind. So there's a version which is normally the day preceding like the carnival where you dress up in the costume and you look all neat and pretty, called Juve, where it's like dirt and powder and paint and mud and like people are flinging it all around and there's music and it's nighttime. So there's like a party version of that. So sometimes I can be there and I could be present in the moment and I could be with everyone and it just feels like a spiritual experience.
What are other examples of symbols of the sacred or of spirituality that you've either sought out in other cultures deliberately or you came across them and somehow they resonated with them? You resonate with them. And it could be they may have been external to your culture and faith, or you had an equivalent of some sort within your culture and faith, but you just couldn't relate to the one that you knew, so you had to seek it elsewhere.
I think in a way the carnival stuff, soca is one. I don't think everyone, like every Caribbean, West Indian person, or whoever else that partakes in these festivities, thinks of it as a spiritual experience. But I think there's a subset of people that fundamentally do, and I'm one of them. And it's their culture, it's their experience. I just discovered it and participating. Um, Honestly, like even church, I've cried in church. The last time I went to church with a lot of my friends that I grew up with in Brooklyn are very religious seems to not be the right word, but like they have a strong sense of faith, and a lot of them are have a Christian foundation. So I would grow up in Brooklyn going to church with them sometimes. Not always did I feel it, but like I've been moved and I felt something there before. When I was younger, I didn't know what was happening. I was like, oh, I'm just sad, and they're like tapping into my sadness, and of course, yeah, whatever. But now I recognize it differently. And the last time we went a few weeks ago when she visited me in Miami, I cried in church. I felt it. It made sense to me though. I was like, yeah, of course I would. I feel it. I feel it here. I'm able to recognize it for what it is now, or at least what I think it is. Oh, I think what part of what meditation has given me, like if whatever it is that I tapped into, and I'm able to at least more openly acknowledge that I think is there versus the like nothing that I thought it was before. It gave me a way to, I think, connect to anyone's spirituality or any religion. It doesn't matter which one it is or what it is. If if it dwells in a place, in a ceremony, in a person, I think I can just a little glimpse of it, connect to it, feel it, understand it. So I was thinking of like the time that I fasted for Ramadan with my friend. I felt it, and that was before any meditation stuff. I think it's just I think it was always there. I just didn't know why. Like I was always curious about religions. I didn't mind going to church. I was always interested in other people's faiths. I thought it was from almost like a social science anthropological perspective, you know, that like from a distance disconnected one, but maybe that's not what it was.
I noticed in your answer you mentioned church a couple of times and fasting for Ramadan, but nothing about temple.
Yeah, so I was having this conversation the other day. Ironically, I've never been to a synagogue in my whole entire life. I'm not opposed to it, but this is how I grew up, right? So my father's side of the family is Jewish. My mom's side of the family is Christian, Orthodox Christian, like Russian Christian. They, from my perspective, and maybe I'm about to be overly judgmental, from my perspective, they are that by like, they identify with it. I don't know that they chose it. I don't know that they definitely don't practice it. And I don't know that they believe it, except in like times of crises where they'll like might. I remember even when I was younger, they might make some reference in like certain moments, and I'd be like, "Wait, did you just say that? But do you believe it?" And then they'll like quickly walk it back and be like, "Oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. It's just whatever." So I never grew up with anyone actively practicing any faith or religion. So I've never been taken to synagogue, and I don't have a lot of Russian speaking friends, Jewish or otherwise, to take me to those places. That's why church and not temple.
And were you specifically going to Eastern Orthodox churches or
No,
others?
because these are Caribbean friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it was never connected to my culture because I don't have anyone in my life to facilitate that for me, and certainly not when I was growing up. And I didn't, I didn't go by myself. I didn't seek it out that way.
When have you felt understood?
I'm assuming by people.
Or AI? Or targeted ads?
Yeah, scarily accurate. I've had a few like hour-long conversations with one AI with Pi. I mean, yeah, in a way, I felt understood. Now that you say it, it it was better able to phrase things than I was. I would send like a 5 minute long voice note. I was trying to have like a IFS session with Pi. I'd send like a 5 minute rambling voice note, and then it would like respond back with like a super short, crisp, clear paragraph saying exactly what I was trying to say, but in a way that in a better way than I could have ever said it myself. So now that you say it, I'll give it that. With people is difficult. I think it's rare. Sometimes I will have conversations of the kind that we're having where it feels like we're on a similar wavelength and we're acknowledging each other's experiences and I feel understood. But when I think about those points with friends, I mean, maybe I shouldn't discount it. There, it's that simple. Sometimes with certain friends that have these kinds of conversations, and we'll have a particular one, and I feel it in the moment. Um, it's just not consistent. It's not reliable. It's in and out.
Mm-hmm. What about misunderstanding then? What are what are some impactful times you've been misunderstood?
Probably all the time. I think I often assume I'm misunderstood by strangers because maybe it's an internal. Maybe I'm self-conscious about it. Maybe it's like an internal paranoia. I just feel like I look on a certain way on paper, and then I'm a very different way on the inside and how I feel, and if you interact with me. And sometimes I'm not sure if you interact with me, it comes across so clearly either in, I don't know, a short amount of time, or if you're coming with certain preconceptions, biases. I don't know. Maybe I'm lucky in that way. For whoever is really close to me that I would care, I think many, even if they don't fully get it, the intention, the spirit of the understanding is there. It's like a positive, assuming positive intent kind of thing.
You mentioned this assumption, like kind of defaulting to that you will likely be misunderstood, and I think what you were describing there was this discrepancy between how you feel inside and the professional version of you. And I'm wondering, as you get more into these creative pursuits and you get in touch with that person more, does there seem to be more alignment between that outward version of you and the inward version?
No, because I also feel like a fake in the artist sense. I don't. Going through the artist way is interesting, right? Because I have to like confront that fundamental identity or belief. Like, am I an artist? I don't. Depending on how you define it and how you scope it, I could say I'm an artist, but it would have to be like a very qualified definition. Otherwise, in the traditional sense, I don't feel like I can say that I deserve to say that. So a lot of times I also feel that way. So for example, like, someone might see that sculpture that I made that I was like surprised came out of me, or the way that I might talk about art in a certain setting where I'm not qualifying it with the fact that like I don't actually have any formal training. I'm not doing it as a career. Like I'm just like a total beginner that's like playing around. People might get the impression that I'm like more serious about art than I am. And then I feel like I'm misunderstood in that sense too. What's interesting that just came up for me before you switched over to that question is, I guess I'm lucky again in this way that I think oftentimes people assume I'm something more than I am, or like they almost attribute more positive intent to me than I might even have.
In what ways?
I mean, example like art skill or ability,
Mm-hmm.
or intentionality, or even just like well meaning, right? Like I might have a great time with a friend, or some kind of conversation, and they'll just, I don't know how to say it, maybe it's almost like a mismatch in commitment levels. Maybe a really practical example, and I think I'm making this up, but it's probably not far from like an actual event that happened, right? Like I might have like certain really close bonding moments with someone. Maybe it's been a while since we connected or reconnected, or maybe it's the present moment even, and they'll just assume that like, oh, of course, like she would come to my wedding, of course she would be in my wedding party, of course she would show up for this, my 40th birthday. And I'm like, but I don't want to do that though. So it's in some
Gotcha.
small ways, but it's, for them, I think it's like a very optimistic, positive assumption that, yeah, I would do these things that are important to you, of course, because we have this connection, we have this relationship. And I try to a
Hmm.
lot. There's a lot of shoulds in my life around those things. I often have an internal battle of like, do I do the things that people expect me to do because like social convention says I'm supposed to do them, and this is what a good friend, a good daughter, a good whatever does, or do I do how I feel and what I want? And where is the line for that and still being a good person and valuing your relationships and being there for people? It's a very fine line for me.
Based on where you are today, the questions that you're still navigating, the questions some which you've answered for yourself, the places that you've given yourself some certainty and freedom. Which of your younger selves do you feel most inclined to hug as a thank you for having lived through it all?
Hmm. I mean, definitely the teenage years. Those were the roughest. It's interesting because I don't have a very good memory of, like, I have a really good memory of Ukraine and Kiev and growing up there. I was there till like 9, 10. So this is the part where like intellectually and factually, it's very familiar to me. And like, I know Ukraine, I was there, I remember all the things. But when at a, at an emotional level, like what was I feeling? And I don't know how to call this memory. It's not the facts and the figures. It's the like, I can close my eyes and see it. I was the experience of it. I don't have those kind of memories. So I don't know how much that child struggled. In some ways, because I don't have those memories, I want to conclude that probably a lot. So maybe that version too. But yeah, I mean, definitely those first few years, like moving, assimilating to the US, and then just the like emotional roller coaster of the teenage years was a lot. It's the one that didn't know that she'd be okay. She'd make it through.
You mentioned earlier the idea of, finding this balance of when is it selfish or not great to put yourself first, and when is it good to give to others. And in your first sabbatical, you did emphasize the idea of, like, you're putting yourself first, and that came from a place of necessity. There
Mm-hmm.
was a lot that you were coming from a place of having gone too far in the other direction. In being aware and really attuned to this balance of what does it mean to put yourself first too much potentially, do you have a sense of where, like, did something go askew for you before, of putting yourself first?
No. Good question. Way to frame it. It hasn't yet, no. It's just a unfounded fear, I suppose. But it doesn't help. Like, I don't know, media, these, I'm not even on social media, but like you just see like narcissists thrown around everywhere. And then you're like, am I a narcissist because I don't want to go to your wedding? I don't know. Maybe I am. And culturally, actually, it also is a big contradiction. And my mother and I have had these conversations, right? The way that I was raised, what's expected of me culturally, like, you don't live for yourself. You're supposed to live for other people. You're supposed to show up for them first. So, and maybe it's also a generational thing. I don't know if you felt it as well, right? Like the fact that I am putting myself first. I don't know that she would ever say it this way, but I think necessarily reading between the lines, the older generation, at least the Eastern European one, like they think that's selfish. So I have that in my head, like that guilt already just off the bat.
I've wondered a lot about this emphasis on individuality that's available. And, like, so much of what I'm asking about is the development of the individual here, and also how the individual finds themselves interconnected with the world, that there's this inseparability there. But there's this, I think I've seen less of that in older generations, and maybe this is a confirmation bias or availability bias too, of there was more interdependence,
Yeah.
palpable interdependence then. And I think we still have that, but we've commercialized so much of it where rather than asking a neighbor to ask to check for something or to babysit, we hire someone. So we've commercialized those elements. So we don't feel we feel the emptiness of we feel the absence of the community and our commercial substitutes for it. And therefore we can focus more on ourselves. Whereas before we would be within this nexus of social ties that we'd have to maintain. And therefore we couldn't do certain things personally for ourselves because that would undermine those relationships or some aspect of those relationships. So we just have more financial freedom to neglect the community, or at least to not be aware of the community. And therefore we're able to develop ourselves more. And there's cons to that too.
Yeah, it makes sense. I'm following it. And it also makes sense that there are trade offs. So just as where the community was a necessity and you were literally dependent on it, could be good, it could be bad, depending on the situation or just
Yeah.
the environment you happen to find yourself in. Similar with the independence now. Because I do think there's a certain level, particularly for me or people like me, where you go too far down that road, you're stuck within yourself, and that's not serving you either. You need community. Human beings are social creatures at the end of the day. We're not meant to be alone. But sometimes I feel like it might make sense, and I think that leads me astray at times.
Which part?
The part that thinks I'm better off alone or to handle it alone, to go through it alone, that I don't need regular interaction with people. It's interesting. There's no way to do like a survey of the world, but I can only imagine that I'm in the minority of like, especially like post COVID, you're working from home, you live alone. Okay, literally, like if we take my day to day, if I make no concentrated effort to go outside, which sometimes happens, I have zero interaction with real human beings in the real world. And that could go on for days, for weeks. That can't be right.
You feel that though. Like you feel that what is that off experience? Something is misaligned internally when you go too long without that. And you try to fix it through other needs, through other methods, but like that need still isn't
I
sated.
really, so for me, I think what happens often, it's sad when you know something and you still have such a hard time addressing it. Because I've removed so many bad habits from my life, but like TV is kryptonite. And I really think what happens, if I'm being honest with myself, I'm just like psychoanalyzing now. I I'm watching people in their relationships, and maybe I've almost formed some kind of attachment to the characters by tuning in daily, and that is my substitute for social interaction, and that is bad. It's enabling me. The TV is enabling me to not interact with real life. And I mean, if you extend that to everyone else, there's social media, there's all these other virtual connections, and it's not the same. Even this, right? This is great and much better than TV or something where you're passively consuming content instead of interacting, but it still doesn't replace like physical touch and human interaction in person. Or not even just human, right? Because I don't even have a pet.
This is something I've thought a lot about. I remember having a hermit phase, and then I would watch some clips, and like I remember tearing up while watching different TV trailers. Sorry, movie trailers. I love
Trailers.
movie trailers; they're great. Yeah, like I don't want to commit to watching the full thing, but of course the trailers are also like the most emotionally poignant elements. And I'm like, no, I want to focus on reading and writing or this or that. And the idea of committing to watching like a full thing was too much. But here's a clip, and like feels kind of satisfying because you completed it. The trailer is done. This emotional, like, oh, I want to. These people are here. I felt their stories so much. Like, oh, I am not socializing enough. Like this is I have got to fix this. But this simulation, like we get this. You have other people. The word simulation isn't the right. It's this vicarious living. We
Mm-hmm.
have it through different forms of media, and something lights up for us because we can't. Our physiology hasn't caught up anywhere near to what we've created
Yeah.
in our recreations of this. Yeah, I definitely can relate to this vicarious substitutes. Substitutes isn't the right term because that suggests they're equivalent. These vicarious simulacra,
Yeah, I don't know.
facsimile.
I call it enablement. I mean, in a very real way, that stuff is an addiction, especially when you're using it to replace or try to replace
Yeah.
the real thing. And I mean, I'm totally guilty as charged. I think what's great about what you're saying, if I'm picking up on it right, is that you have the awareness, maybe even the focus to catch it in the moment and recognize it and know what you really need. I don't necessarily have that, and I think a lot of other people don't either. By the time you pick up on it, you're like down the rabbit hole, and it's that much harder to dig your way out.
Well, it doesn't sound like you're unfamiliar with it. You mentioned like you know what you're doing when you watch those TV shows, and now you're probably going to be like, "Oh, I know what I'm doing when I'm watching this TV show."
I mean, that's fair. I don't know how to. It happens in two ways. It'll either happen where I'm aware and then I do it anyway, or it'll happen where I didn't realize that I'm lost and I only realize it when I'm like really far down.
Mm-hmm.
It the fewer and further in between moments are the ones where I'm like, oh no, I know what I'm doing, and let me not do it.
How does this connect to? I mean, thematically, this feels like it. There's something here about what you're building with an AI chatbot and the time you spend
Yeah,
chatting with a pie.
do
And I've been thinking so much about this idea of all right, when AI, as it imminently looms, what will be the fundamental human things that we still retain? Where do we build more because we know that's the part that can't be replaced, and we wouldn't want to replace it.
This is where I struggle, honestly, because there's a part of me that wants to like never have a smartphone again, just totally become anti-tech, think we're just about to destroy our civilization. And then there's another part of me that's thinking about like cures for cancer and access to opportunity and education. And I that's a contradiction that I'm still carrying for now. I don't know. The chatbot is a perfect example. What in a way, what technology I think is really doing is just highlighting the problems within our society and within ourselves. So we can solve it by, it's kind of like you can solve it by making drugs illegal, or you can just address the actual issues with the people that are struggling in society. That's a way to think about what's happening with AI and technology, because the chatbot is for language learning. The way that it happened is my friend Omar and I have been trying to learn Spanish and French for forever. Like Duolingo, tutors, all the things, whatever. We've tried lots of different things, but we're not at like a conversational level. And I mean, we're talking like basic conversational level. Um, and we're also introverts and shy and like want to get it right. So we feel very self conscious trying to awkwardly and painfully have conversations with people that speak the language because we know we're not there yet. So we're like, oh, great, let's build a chatbot so we could practice and it'll help us get to the point where we feel more confident and comfortable and we can actually have some kind of like semi-productive conversation with a person and get any point across. So in our mind, it's a means to an end. There are other people that will just go out down the street, like totally mess up, have the time of their lives, that inhibition, right? That inhibition is low. I love those people. I strive to be like that when I grow up. In some ways, I'm able to access that now, right? In some ways, the bar is still high. So knowing me and my limitations, if I don't have Duolingo, if I don't have the chatbot to practice with, if I don't have some kind of safe space to get there, I'm just not going to get there. And I think there are other people like that. So do you remove the option for everyone because it might help some and harm others?
You mentioned earlier you were on dating apps. And now there's this among Gen Zers, there's this like discussion of like, oh, screw dating apps, they're horrible. They've all kind of converged around this one commercially optimized, human de-optimized, human minimum, commercial maximum, which eventually faded or starting to fade approach. And so there's this range of human behaviors that are encouraged by or that are limited by the available options to us. And there's this inflection point of, call it 2010 maybe, online dating was still kind of weird. By 2015 it was kind of accepted, and by certainly 2020 became like the thing
Yeah.
because COVID
I think
shifted
maybe it
things.
was COVID because I remember using it back in like 2015-ish and it wasn't the majority. The inflection point is when it became the predominant way to meet others. Now you would struggle to meet others otherwise. It's rare.
And so you almost expect to meet people that way, and you don't try it in other ways. And
Yeah.
so I think what you're describing with the learning technologies might be, I can see a similar path there. Not necessarily that it would go in that direction, but today we have the option we're going to go to France, we're going to immerse ourselves, we're going to meet the people, and by necessity we'll have to learn language. That's different from, we are taking this introvert friendly AI tool versus doing any people thing at all. Like the people who might have needed it today, that might be the main group, but soon the people who don't want to take the risk of a different group will use it there instead.
I don't know, but there's a compliment, right? Because I did that. I went to France. I immersed. I'm still struggling because there's a reinforcement aspect and there's a real practice
Yeah.
aspect. Like I've had tutors and in between classes, yeah, like sometimes I would do my homework. Maybe this is also just a hypothesis I have about language learning in particular. Like if you take Duolingo, that I've done for years, have all the points or whatever, if I take what I did in between classes or tutors, it didn't get me to the point of fluency. And I'm defining fluency at a basic level of like, can I carry a few sentences back and forth? And it didn't get me there. And I think it's legitimately for like lack of daily conversational practice, listening and speaking practice rather than reading or writing or translating Duolingo style.
Mm-hmm.
So in some ways, it's a very tactical approach, just off of my experience. And I mean, I'm not a, like foreign language professor and I didn't go to school for this. So there's a lot of assumptions there. But there are already a lot of tools that exist and I just don't think they're effective. The next best would be to have a tutor that you practice speaking with every day or every other day. And I mean, not a lot of people have the time or the money for that. So this is sort of to complement or I don't want to say replace it because I do still think having a tutor or like being in a live class to get to fluency, like speaking with a real person is important, but you just need to do so much more of it to get there. So it'll help bridge the gap and hopefully get you there faster. But other forms of AI, yeah, no, for sure. There's going to be a lot of dicey spots. It's also in who's building it and what's their intention. Like Omar and I are being trying, and even sometimes with the best intention and the most awareness and asking yourself all the questions, you may still go awry for sure. But we have all of that on our minds, and we kind of like came away from the like corporate tech, the VC tech, and all the stuff that we saw that's questionable or like mixed incentives, and are trying to do it without that in a vacuum. So sometimes it's like what pressure is being applied on the people or the team? What's the motivation for the product? What are their goals? Like really their end goals? And sometimes it's just a lack of awareness, right? It's that like classic conversation of like, who are all the AI engineers? Do they have the same background? Do they have the same life experience? Are they thinking from a diverse perspective? Probably not.
I remember years ago thinking about how there probably will be regional AIs based on the cultural values that come up. Like we spoke earlier about the individual developing within a community, and for years I wondered, well, if you have a culture that prioritizes individuality, then that would be at the expense, perhaps, of the communal.
Hmm.
And then somebody who was encouraged in that path will be perpetually that, never realizing there's a community aspect necessary. A communocentric, and these are extreme, crude simplifications. A communocentric culture would suppress the development of the individual for the benefit of the communal. And someone who's in there would never realize the importance of the individual. They wouldn't be able to, because culturally that would be less emphasized.
But aren't there always outliers that creep up? They wouldn't be, maybe they would
Outliers,
be
sure.
shunned. They wouldn't be accepted. But there, I
Yeah.
feel like there'd always be some nuances, some little glimpses coming up of something different. It's just a matter of how open and accepting that community is too. But it's interesting because there's supposed to be this promised land of even like self development, a lot of this meditation stuff, this individual personal growth, right? There's this ethos that's supposed to be okay, you invest in yourself, you make yourself a better person. And once you, not even once you get there, but the further you are along that path, the more you're giving back to your community, the more you're showing up, the more you are interacting. So it's supposed to be symbiotic.
That's the hope. I guess it depends where
Yeah.
you're starting from, because I think what you're describing suggests more of an individualistic culture to start. A communal culture may not emphasize that as much. So I've wondered if those are the crude simplifications of different mental schema available for the development of the underlying architecture that would then be visible within there. It would be imbued within that work, and the in, imputed mental schema then.
Yeah. It's hard to think about it in such a structured and methodical way, isn't it?
What's a memory that you revisit regularly?
I was going to say there were some at different points in my life. I feel like it's always more feelings from a certain time period rather than like a specific memory. Because, for example, with the meditation center, I can kind of like access how I was feeling, the the vibe, but I don't know that it's any one particular memory necessarily. Yeah, I don't know. It's more like a reference back to a chapter in a book rather than a specific page, if that analogy helps. And in that case, I reference a lot often because I'm thinking, and then like it'll trigger a certain point in my life. So like with meditation, or with like a past relationship, or with my father passing away, or with high school, or with yeah, it's just whenever um, whatever's relevant that comes up. I don't know if there's any specific one that I often go back to in particular. Do you have like a poignant memory that you go back to?
Some are strategic. Like if I'm having trouble sleeping, I think back to specific times during my farming years,
Hmm.
like the certain sound, certain soundscape. Sometimes there's a return to simpler years of having the questions but not knowing what to do with them.
Is that a
And I think
specific memory?
it's like the associations with a specific crowd of maybe the first times I remember hearing cicadas in like a very hot summer day and thinking about the lack of challenges during that summer.
Hmm.
Kind of the But I know when I go to those places, it tends to be of I'm a little bit overwhelmed in the present, so I want to find some of the solace of the past, some of the more simple elements of the past.
So it's almost like a tactic, a coping mechanism.
Self-soothing by looking through the past. Yeah.
Self-soothing, yeah. That's a good way to put
Yeah.
it.
Who are all the people you've yet to be?
The artist for sure. The artist, the pet owner, maybe the family person. I often I struggle with this. It just came up. I think it's on the task list for. I'm in week 5 of the artist way. So like the 60, the 80-year-old version of me. Like what's Grandma Anya like? I don't know. I think I know there's a lot of future versions there, but I don't know that I know all of them or who they are. Do you ever think about like, all right, realistically, this is 2024. What the hell is going to happen by 2050? Like, what are we going to be living in? You know? And are we going to embrace it, or are we going to be like the older generation now that's like,
I mean, there's you have this inherent openness that's more common among the youth, and you have this inherent conservatism or less openness that's common among the elder folks, and there's a certain complementarity that comes with the exchange between the two.
but in some
But
ways
no,
it's
I'm not.
slowly
I'm not.
happening. I mean, I don't know, for example, your habits with social media, but I never thought it would happen to me, even just maybe definitely 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But the more that I was saying, like I separated myself from that earlier version of myself that's kind of keeping up more with popular culture, the consumerism of it all, the further I realized, like, oh, I don't know what movies are out today. I don't know the music, the new music that people are listening to. I'm not on social media. So I can only imagine, like, 2 more decades from now, how much more distance there would be between what society is doing. And whether I think it makes any sense, whether I even understand it, whether I'm able to even participate in it if all of a sudden I wanted to, you know, you can quickly find yourself left behind, and maybe in a good way. But
I experienced this in seeing like the top music charts. Like, oh, Eminem's new song came out, and like I see what else is in the charts. And I think, who are these artists? I've never heard of these. And like, what's this style? And what is this? How I'm completely oblivious to these things. Now, granted, within media, there's been a lot more of a fracturing of interest. You have you have fewer major stars and many more smaller, medium large size stars.
But there was a point where you used to be on top of that. Like you used to be into that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. But also I've chosen to opt out of certain things. Like I don't do TikTok. I find a need to self-flagellate after I do any YouTube shorts. Like I know this is not what I want for my attention span. I try to read older books, and I enjoy reading older books. There's certain authors that I know I will deliberately balance out the new versus old elements.
Hmm.
So I want some more of that timelessness. But there's also like the different seasons of our lives, and like maybe it's good to embrace that I'm in a new season now, and as I enter that each subsequent
So do you think you'll be an out of touch
epoch.
grandpa?
I was an out of touch 20-year-old.
Okay, there's your answer.
Yeah. I my lifelong search has been, and I've only recently had some language for it, looking for the timeless and the contemporary. I want to understand that what holds true regardless of what era we're in. And that's why I'm drawn to health. There's like a physiological, biological element that's inextricable from that. And certainly the symbols that we have in our contemporary culture will embody those things. What's timeless? Like this is just the current manifestation of it. And I've wondered what it means to be able to speak to peers of the zeitgeist while considering how the message has been phrased previously. But that's what I've always been after. If it's too ephemeral, if it's too like I don't, if it's too trendy, I feel immediately skeptical of it.
Peers of the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Does that mean that you consider yourself to be part of the zeitgeist?
I know I'm inextricable from today because I rely on my phone in many ways, and um, I know cultural references, and at one point I remember enjoying those heavily and like trafficking in them socially. But there are definitely times when I prefer where I wonder like how on earth do we get to this place, and I don't feel like I belong in here. Like there's so many. It's very much an outside looking in perspective of like this. Some of this seems so fundamentally off.
So is it
I,
less
I
of a belonging to and more of a rejection of popular culture?
I think I choose not to participate in it because it doesn't feel like it's the right thing for me. I realized how I feel when I am around it and when I'm doing something with it. I don't like the way I feel as a result. So I'd rather go for things that seem to be more valuable. And I think like the parallel for this, like there's some like the analogies I've experienced or tried to put this together in different ways is in recent about the last year or so, I've been really drawn to worship music, and that's because I'm drawn to the idea of culture as something that elevates us,
Hmm.
that brings us closer to communing with something that's timeless, whether it's our interconnection with each other, with the world, with the ineffable, however, like whatever layer or angle you want to look at it. That was a big, and so much of what feels like so much of what is promoted within popular culture feels more indulgent and denigrating. And I didn't like when I what I felt like when I was going to that. So well, where do I find the other stuff? And the way I likened it is like, well, liking it to I know where the noise is. I know how to find the noise, but how do I find the silence? Well, the noise makes noise, therefore you know how to find it. You look for the loudest thing. But how do you look for the quietest thing? Because if silence made noise, it wouldn't be noise. It wouldn't be silence anymore. So silence can't beckon to itself. It has to. I think it invites,
Hmm.
whereas noise imposes.
That's a
And
really good way to put
finding
it.
finding that invitation is, and being attuned to it is hard. And I think I just kept following that path of like, well, where am I seeing those patterns?
Yeah.
And that's what led me to Buddhist explorations and to art, to spirituality. It just, where's that continuity? Where's that thread?
Yeah, that resonates.
Was there something that you were hoping to be able to share about your inner landscape that you didn't earlier?
I will summarize it that I just, I don't know. I don't want to misrepresent where I'm at. I'm still very much in a place, and I think fundamentally, if you dig deep enough, everyone will get there. Like, all I know is that I don't know anything at all. That kind of captures it all for me. I'm still just figuring it out day by day.
One of the main areas of focus of this conversational portrait is to capture how you're fully becoming yourself. And becoming is the specific word there because it's gerund, ing, continuous process. In reflecting on this conversation, how do you feel about the person you're becoming?
I don't think I've fully been able to say this before, but even in, the darker days that I have recently, I think I'm up fundamentally in a better place than I was even just a few years ago. It could still be dark, it could still be a struggle, it could still be happy, but like the baseline, I think, shifted just a tiny bit at least. The relationship to myself, for sure. Probably that's the most significant. And then thereby my relationship to the outside world. I think my biggest worry is the next step. That's what we talked about, right? At what point does it become symbiotic? I don't know that I'm quite there yet in terms of like, okay, I've invested all of this work in myself and I'm continuing to do so. But at what point am I able to pour that back out into the world and other people in a way that I feel like is significant enough, commensurate to what I've gotten internally? I hope I get there while I still can. But I also know that it will be, it won't work to force it.
We started off with learning about where you find your silence. And so I'd like to give you the silence now to have and or to fill. So the space is now yours.
What do you get out of these conversations?
There's a bidirectionality to it for me. One is when I hear you say that you didn't think about something in this way before, you didn't connect something. That's, oh, something about our discussion helped facilitate that. And so if that's something that I've been able to contribute to, that means that maybe there are questions that I can ask in an environment that I've been able to help facilitate for others who are receptive to it, to get to a new depth of clarity. That feels tremendous, because then that feels like something that, at least in this exchange, it was distinctly something that I can provide.
Is that what you're
And
hoping
so
for the audience as well?
I'm not sure what I'm hoping for a listener. And I'm using the word singularly. I've been thinking a lot about this medium, because it's just a single person listening to it, usually through headphones. Maybe it's someone listening in a car, maybe it's a group, but um, most is just that individual. Of, I hope that there is an openness to these types of questions overall, knowing that there's a place for this. I think there's an optimism that we yearn for these types of encounters, whether they're verbal or intuitive. whether they need to be actually phrased, but at least like this notion of understanding. And that I think we are in environments where we frequently have those sides not that they're malnourished because we don't have those sides cultivated, invited, and played with. That's a question I forgot to ask you, where your playful side is and where you cause mischief.
It's a good one. It's a struggle. It's a neglected side. So back to the listener.
I think in learning about another person in the way that they would look at a visual portrait, they see something in that, and hopefully they spend more than the typical 3 seconds that people spend looking at a painting. Spending time with somebody else, they understand the emotional contours, spiritual contours of a guest, and that they turn that way, inward. And this is something that I'm hoping for myself, and this is why I ask some of these questions. I guess it's why I ask all the questions. I wonder what is unique and what is universal.
Hmm.
What is the unique expression of the universal in each person, and how do they confront it? I found myself in a challenging situation several months ago where I felt very betrayed. And I remember texting some friends like, "Hey, when have you felt betrayed?" And I was asked, like, "Wait, why are you asking me about, if you're feeling this, why do you want to know about my experience?" Like, oh, well, I think that one of the major reasons is I want to know how others feel, to know that this is not a distinctly me experience. If we're all prone to this, that's terrific. I know that this isn't something that's insurmountable. It feels not great, but knowing that it's something that we share, great. This is just my version, my time to experience that.
That's really interesting that you touch on that. Not to bring it back to tech and all that stuff, but one of the startups that I've been advising, founders I've been working with, they are trying to do, their tagline is social but not social. But one of the things they're trying to do, I mean, effectively you can label it as a well-being app, but they're trying to help people feel seen and not alone in their moods and emotions in a way that is
Oh,
not
interesting.
social media. So like the fact that you said that you just wanted to know that others felt that also. It's like the communion in the shared experience and the shared feeling. Definitely think there's something about that. Because oftentimes when I was talking about like that time when I reach out to friends for support that I'm relying on, it is exactly that. It's the time where I'm struggling, but I'm not yet down the rabbit hole. So I'm like, have you been there also? Am I crazy? It's like it's those moments of checking in a way to know that
Yeah.
it is universal, I guess, in a sense.
And I mentioned earlier there's a bidirectionality. So part of it, yeah, that's what I want to provide for somebody else. Like, oh, look, if I have this, if I've been told I have a capacity for conversation, for questions in some way, at least like for this genuine curiosity, which it's just so strong. I want to know the most sincere side of a person. I yearn for that in conversation. I feel downright icky when I'm chatting with somebody. And I just hear the affectation and think like, I
You want to
just,
skip through all
who
that.
are you? Yeah, like what you described of with your friends of like, let's just get past the surface level stuff. And so part of it is also wanting to set an example of like, or at least an example that, look, there's a way. Here are people doing that. Let's have more of those. And I need those types of conversations. Like, there's such a benefit that I get from learning about how you've navigated the questions that seem so. Without this, I think the questions that I've thought about for so long, or I've wondered, those questions are isolating.
Hmm.
And then in mediums like this, they're uniting, more than uniting. They're it's a way to commune.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Hopefully, then it
And
was
so I've
mutually beneficial.
profoundly so.
Yeah, I think similarly. I feel like I mean, I know that I got benefit out of it, so it was good to hear that it was mutually beneficial. And then it's interesting to see, like in a more tactical way, where this will go or what you will do with it once you put it out into the world. And what responses there will be. That's the curiosity of me coming out.
I've been thinking about, I've heard this phrase. I think it was James Finley. He's this a religious figure who said the idea of a meditation for two. Conversation can be that. And so I've put a little spin on it, which has a cheesy rhyme: a meditation for two on behalf of you, meaning to the the listener. But I like the idea of a conversation that I don't want to clip it, because you wouldn't clip a prayer, you wouldn't clip a meditation. You would say, this is how I felt about this experience. You should go experience the full thing.
All 3 hours and 14 minutes.
Well, we had a break. We had yeah. Well, Lex Friedman did it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm surprised. There are a few more doing it now too. Was that a model? Is this something that you had like a reference point in mind for the Lex Friedman podcast?
I mean, I got permission, in that sense, that yes, lengthy conversations can be good, but I know that the most satisfying conversations are the ones that get to places. And I actually tried to make this shorter. I really did. Your answers were so good, and there was just
Oh,
so much to meander through. I'm like, and I've cut so many things. Um, yeah, it was just. I think in general, just I'm too ambitious for what I want from a single session.
I mean,
I have like a
just
go for
with
it.
writing, like it's much more difficult to make it short and concise than to make it long,
Yeah,
right? So it's a lot harder to cut it down to 100 words or something like that. So it makes sense in a way.
but I don't want the efficiency. Like if this is yeah, to see someone, for someone to show themselves, you
Mm.
can't do that suddenly.
AI will do the highlights and the summary for you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
That's a part two conversation.
Yes. Anya, thank you for taking the time for a conversational portrait.
Thank you. Really. Thank you for the time to reflect and bond.